right, Chair Studebaker, we're ready when you are.
Okay. This meeting of the Lake Oswego Redevelopment Agency is called to order. Madam Recorder, will you please call the roll?
Chair Studebaker?
Here.
Councilor Wynn?
Here.
Lamont?
Here.
Wendland?
Here.
Mans?
Here.
Koha?
Here.
And O'Neill.
Here.
Okay, our first order of business is an update on the North Anchor project. And Mr. Sin, will you please introduce our guests?
Yes, well, good afternoon, Chair Studebaker, members of the board. I was going to introduce Sarah Zahn, project manager from Urban Development Partners, and I was really going to turn it over to Sarah and let her introduce the rest of the team for this afternoon. Sarah, go for it.
Here I come. Sorry about that. Just took me a minute to technologically get set. So good afternoon, Mayor and councilors. Thank you so much for having us back. I have two other members of my team with me this afternoon. Eric Kress, principal at UDP, and Teresa Newt, who is our director of investments. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a brief presentation, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions as well. Okay, is everyone seeing my screen okay here?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Just a quick update for you all today on our North Anchor project. Again, thank you for having us. As everyone recalls, we're working on the 3 parcels that comprise the North Anchor project. We have a residential component of the project and a hotel component of the project. Wanted to give an update first on our residential component. You can see here a rendering that's still, a relatively early representation of the project, looking at the project, kind of looking northeast from the corner of First and B. The first thing I wanted to provide an update on is, I think we've told you before that we were looking at, we've evaluated both rental and condominium project at this location. We spent some time over the last couple of months really doing research on whether we felt there was a feasible for sale project here. And what we learned after doing a little bit of work with both our design and construction team and some local brokers who are familiar with the sales market in Lake Oswego is that the for sale market is strong in Lake Oswego. There is good demand here. But what we're facing in this market is that it's very expensive to build condominiums here. That's why you're not seeing very many condominiums being developed, not only in Lake Oswego, but really in the region. It's just very expensive between construction costs and the cost of liability insurance and sales costs. It's very expensive to build condominiums. And what we find is that in order for us to be able to make them feasible, we have to be able to sell them for more than $1,000 a square foot, which we feel is a pretty significant risk in the marketplace for us. And again, it's why you're really just not seeing many for sale products out there in the market right now. So although we do believe that there's strong demand, we don't believe there's strong demand for condominiums at above $1,000 a square foot. So we've elected to focus on the rental project at the North Anchor project, and we think we can, make this into a really super project, and we do feel that the demand will be strong there. So we're really focusing our efforts moving forward on having this be a rental project. And that's what we started out with back in the day, but we did feel we wanted to make a strong run at understanding whether there was a for sale option here. So that being said, we have a current unit mix at this project. We're currently designed for 75 apartments, and that's across the two parcels that are on the east side of First Avenue. Our unit mix at this concept design phase, which is still subject to change, As it breaks down as follows. You can see we have just a few studio apartments. We have 21 bedroom, 1 bath units. We have a floor plan with 1 bedroom, 1 bath that includes a den. And we find that this is a really popular floor plan for folks who are working from home or they want a little bit of extra space, but they don't necessarily need a full 2 bedroom. And then we also have a number of 2 bedroom, 2 bath units because that is and will remain a popular floor plan for rental units in the market. The project currently includes 62 on-site parking spaces, and then we have 17 additional on-street parking spaces. And I'm going to give you a little bit more of an in-depth parking analysis shortly on that as well. And then the project also includes about 6,600 square feet of ground floor retail stretching along B Avenue. And that is divisible into a number of smaller spaces and designed to be flexible for potential future users down the road. And these on the right, you see some photo images, and these are not fully designed yet, but are just kind of here to demonstrate sort of the level of fit and finish that we're thinking about for these rental apartments. They should be a very nice high-end finish level. And as you've heard from the architect before, describe sort of their, very focused on sort of the natural elements and the connection to nature that's inherent in the Lake Oswego market. And then I will give a quick update on the hotel program as well. This is a very early rendering that some of you may have seen before, looking at the hotel from B Avenue toward a planned indoor-outdoor dining option that will stretch along B Avenue. It's kind of a nice image there. We are still focusing in on approximately 60 hotel rooms. Again, that may move up or down a little bit as we refine the design, but it will be around a 60-unit hotel with a ground floor restaurant, bar, and lounge. We do have some optionality around additional amenity, including fitness, a potential rooftop lounge, and private dining. And we want to evaluate that further once we've identified our hotel operators so that they can provide input on how we're sort of maximizing and operating that hotel. We have also done quite a bit of work on the parking at the hotel, and we've currently managed to design in a system of 60 parking spaces. It will be accommodated in a valet car stacking system, so all of the parking at the hotel that's on the site will be accommodated through a stacking valet system. And then additionally, we have 5 on-street parking spaces. So I know that there's been a lot of discussion about parking, and we've been spending a lot of time analyzing parking. So this is a slide that has a lot of data on it. I apologize for that, but the parking analysis here is a little bit complicated because zoning code requires a number of different parking kind of counts based on the various uses. So I've tried to break it down. So on the top, you see an analysis of the hotel site, and on the bottom is an analysis of the residential sites. So based on the hotel room count of 60 rooms, your parking code with some reductions for being in the more of the central city, the downtown zone, is 0.64 required spaces per room, which comes out to a requirement of 38 parking spaces for the hotel. Then additionally, we have to add in parking for the retail square footage. So at about 2,700 square feet of retail, at the use of a restaurant usage, we're required to provide 7.63 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So that requires an additional 21 parking spaces for the hotel, getting us to a total requirement of 59 parking spaces for the hotel. And currently we're providing 65. We're allowed to count in those 5 on-street spaces toward our parking count per code. So similarly, we've done an analysis for the residential building. Residential parking count is calculated based on bedrooms. So you can see that depending on the bedroom type, we have a slightly different space requirement per unit. So at 75 residential units under our current parking count, we are required to provide 65 parking spaces. Retail at the building is a little more complicated because retail requirements can vary quite widely depending on the use in Lake Oswego. So at the low end, we're required to provide 1.89 parking stalls per 1,000, and that's for a non-food use, all the way up to 7.63 spaces per 1,000 for a full service restaurant use. So that gives us quite a wide range of parking requirement at the residential building. On the low end, we would be required to provide 12. And on the high end, assuming that 100% of that 6,600 square feet was food service, we would be required to provide 50. So that's a pretty big range to plan for in development at this stage. So you can see that our total spaces required ranges on the low end from 77 to the high end of 115. In our current design, which you've seen in the past, on the western portion of the residential building, we have 2 levels of parking. And on our eastern smaller parcel, we have 1 level of parking kind of tucked in behind structurally tucked in behind the buildings. We have been able to achieve a total of 79 total spaces provided, between 17 on-street spaces and the rest accommodated in the structure. So I think one of the ongoing discussions that we've been having, and that I know you'll be having, is, can we provide more parking at this location? We can add an additional tray of below grade parking at our west building parcel. So that's the middle parcel, kind of at the corner of B and First. We can dig down an additional level of below grade parking and provide up to 41 additional spaces. That's at an additional cost of $2.8 million, which, if you break that down, it comes out to about $68,000 per stall. And that's including both construction costs and costs of permit and design and all the other fees that go into construction. And I will say that, based on costs we see for underground parking, that's in line or even a little bit less expensive than what we see in other locations for providing below grade parking. But it is expensive because this is a small parcel and it's not a particularly efficient parcel. So it does cost some, it's expensive to build below grade parking no matter where you're doing it. But when you're doing it in a smaller garage, you just don't net as many spaces. So I think that the upshot of this analysis is that, we are meeting our parking requirement with the plan that we have without the additional below grade parking right now. However, it does limit us in terms of future retail development, because we would be limited to uses that have a lower parking requirement. So while we do, of course, have interest in seeing additional parking developed at the site, it does come as a trade-off, because parking is expensive to build, and it doesn't, you can't earn a lot of money. You don't monetize it particularly well. So we're in a position of trying to analyze and I think have discussions with the city about where the value is in that additional parking. And we can talk a little bit more about that later, but it's always seems to be a significant piece of our conversation when we're talking about the trade-offs in development, is how expensive parking is and how much you need of it. So moving on, I wanted to give you all an update on our search to secure a hotel operator. I know in the last couple of months, we've had a lot of discussions about our operator partner. And as I think you've heard both from us and from staff, we came into this proposal with a loose partnership with Atticus Hotel out of McMinnville. And at this point, we have mutually decided that we're not going to be able to come to business terms with them. They're a wonderful operator and a great partner, but their vision for the future of their business is a little bit different than how we feel we can put together a deal on this project. So we have kind of mutually agreed to to part ways and move on. And UDP is now in the process of seeking a new hotel operator partner for this project. Like we said in our response to the initial RFP, our priority here is for a unique full service hotel of a high quality and in keeping with, what we think downtown Lake Oswego deserves and demands. So our selection process is really targeted toward hotel operators that we think will bring that unique, high quality to downtown Lake Oswego. We are focused on an independent operator, so we are not looking at branded flags, so not a national brand. Really, we're seeking an operator who can partner with us to create a unique brand. So some of the things that we'll be looking for are potential partners with strong operational histories, who can demonstrate success in really creating that brand and working with operators to do that. And also folks who are companies who've demonstrated that they can work well with a local community and that they understand a local market. So looking for partners who've worked in smaller communities before and have successfully been able to differentiate themselves in those communities. Our plan is to do limited outreach to potential operators. We're currently planning to reach out to 2 to 3 potential pre-vetted operators. So folks we've had conversations with, we know who are qualified, we know that sort of fit the criteria that we have, and really give them an opportunity to, effectively compete for the business here. So I just threw up a few photos of some precedent images of the types of quality and design that we would expect and be working with for future hotel operators here. Our process and timeline for bringing on an operating partner is, we're expecting to do this fairly quickly. We're at a point in design where we really want to move forward with an operator partner at our side. We were able to do quite a bit of our early design without needing to have an operating partner standing next to us, thinking about how the building will really function. But we're at the point now where the choices we start to make really do impact operations. So we want to get that operating partner onto our team here as soon as possible. So we've set forth the timeline you see on your screen here, where we expect to issue an RFP actually by Friday. That is in process right now. We'll have about 3 weeks for the teams to respond to that request for information, do interviews in mid-December, and have the selection complete by the end of the year. And then we hope to conclude a management agreement, or at least a significant portion of a management agreement with business terms in the first part of next year, in January of 2021. So that's the update on our 2 projects. And I actually have another slide in here, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Teresa, who's joined us today. And Teresa is really the person in our firm who goes out and raises our equity and works on our equity funds for these projects. So wanted to bring her in to just give you a little bit of color and background on where we are with the funds that we're working on for this project. So turn it over to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to the board for having me here today. I'm actually calling in from the Lake Oswego office of Urban Development Partners. I'm fortunate enough to live in Lake Oswego and call it home. So it's great to be with you all today, and thank you for your efforts on this project. The Urban Development Partners name includes the word partners. And in this case, our partners are our investors. And just to give you a picture of who our investors are, they are they're based nationwide in just about every state you can think of. You got quite a few folks in Texas, folks in Boston, folks in New York, so across the country, with a good concentration here in the Pacific Northwest. Many of the investors have been with us for over 10 years, And they've worked with us for, I think they probably average about 3 funds each now, meaning they'll come, they'll invest their money in a fund, that fund will mature and close, we'll sell some of the buildings in it, and then they'll roll that over into a fund that we have open. I highlight those things because I think when you're developing in what some could consider a turbulent time, it's important to know that the investor base has been through a real estate cycle before, and ours have definitely done that. Many of the folks that are current investors invested with UDP in 2008, 2009, when Eric and Avi, our other founder, had this crazy idea that that Southeast Division would be a fantastic street to build multifamily apartment buildings on, and put businesses like Salt and Straw Ice Cream into the bottom level as retail. And so I highlight that to tell you that, to share with you that our investors, have been around the block for a while, then they know how to evaluate a good project. They're also very interested in taking in this information, that's coming out right now about the suburban momentum. And if any of you are interested in seeing any of that, we can share some, but not just cities like Lake Oswego, but cities like Sacramento, where Sarah's currently developing a multifamily building, are really seeing a lot of growth as places that people want to live and work. They're moving away from there are trends that are showing that people are moving away from wanting to live in really larger metro areas and maybe to some of the higher quality suburbs now. So we're really liking that, especially as it relates to what our intent is here in this Lake Oswego project. So our current investor base is taking that in. In addition to the relying on our standard fund structure, which is a fund, we'll put in one-to-many buildings in a fund. Our investors will come in and be the equity investors and own a little bit of many buildings. Lake Oswego gives us an opportunity to create a product that is new and unique to us. And we're calling it an accelerator fund. And alongside our multi-entity funds, we're also going to create a smaller fund that is just the hotel and or just the residential component. And one of the reasons we're doing that here, quite honestly, is because of our community pride. Living here, we all love it, driving by our high school, pointing out that that's the high school that our kids go to, or that's the place I go to have coffee. And so I think that I'm going to use that unique LO focused fund as a way to maybe be a fit for someone who just wants to invest in Lake Oswego. And I will be offering that alongside our larger fund, which is Tabor 4, which is the fund that we're currently funding Lake Oswego from. So we're already actively meeting with new potential Lake Oswego investors and investors who might be aware of Lake Oswego, but don't necessarily live here. We're also in very close contact with the folks over at the Iron Light in the Beacon, because I think there's going to be a lot of nice synergy between Sarah's efforts with putting in a great hotel and their efforts to establish a great event venue. So the financing is moving along, even though we don't have an exact hotel operator now, and we don't have an exact pro forma for the project. We anticipate that we'll have that coming up here in Q1. But there's a lot of great local excitement for the project. And that alone, I think I could probably pull in enough dollars for the equity piece. Sarah, anything else that you think would be important?
No, I think that's great to hear from you, Teresa. And we really wanted to bring Teresa along today so that you could hear a little bit more color about how we're approaching this from a financing standpoint in what are challenging times for capitalizing hospitality generally in the marketplace today. So we're lucky to have Teresa, lucky to have a local Lake Oswego cheerleader who believes strongly in the community and in this project. So as we work through, a market that has been not an easy market for, in our COVID pandemic times, for convincing investors that they should invest in hospitality, knowing that we have some interesting hooks into the community and into this project is great. So thank you, Teresa. So at this point, that kind of concludes the prepared presentation I had today, and I wanted to turn it over and give council an opportunity to ask any questions.
Can you, would you mind taking your shared screen off so I can see the whole group?
Sure, I'm trying to
Thank
figure
you.
out. There we go. How's that?
Okay, Skip, Councilor O'Neill, you had a question?
I have a question for Teresa. Teresa, are you affiliated with American Financial?
I'm not, but would be happy to talk to you about that.
I mean, is that one of the groups that you're talking to for raising funds for this project?
No, right. I haven't been talking with them, but I'm happy to, would love to, quite honestly, as we move forward, especially since I'm in town, would love to connect with anyone on the board who, most importantly wants to know more about UDP and what we do. Would be happy to get together at a distance as appropriate, or get on the phone. But Skip, if there's someone I should meet over there to talk to,
Well, American Financial is a Lake Oswego company that does exactly what you explained. They put together funds for investment in small cap funds for commercial property all over the country. And they're very familiar with hotels, apartments, all kinds of projects. And they have quite a large investment of investors across the country, but probably the power players of the Portland, Seattle area by far.
Great.
Any
If
other
there's someone I
questions?
should reach out to, I'd love a name. Let me know.
Okay,
All right.
Councilor Lamont. you
I'll
have a
get
question?
that. I'll get that
Thank
to
you.
Councilor Lamont.
Yes, Sarah, Eric, and Teresa, great news that you're still in our partnership. We're looking forward to this. I think we all fully understand that the hotel needed to change tracks a little bit because of where we were going with it. But thanks for the good work. I do have a question because this came up during Windward, the Weiser Block development. And a lot of people, and I stood in line one day and listened to people when they were asking questions at the booth outside on the street before it was built, of the Windward folks. That why couldn't a building be condos that they wanted, as you found, they wanted to buy, not rent. And the response was, which we knew because we'd already talked to them, was we're going to build it to condo level standards, but we'll do possibly condos at least in one building down the road. And I understand the liability problem, but when you say you're going to have high-end finishes on the apartments, but that it's costly construction to build a condo, what's the difference from a condo to a high-end apartment? Construction-wise. Sarah.
Sure. And Eric, feel free to chime in here as well. There are differences in how you approach the construction of an apartment versus condo, and probably the most important one, which is not a hard and fast rule, but which is something that from UDP's perspective would be important, is that we would not build a condo building out of a wood frame construction. And that's predominantly due to liability issues, but it's also a question of quality. And that automatically, especially in a low-rise building, increases costs by 20% just on the base of the construction alone. And then you do make some different choices about finish level between apartments and condos that add costs. And then a lot of the costs comes in in addition to finishes and that, difference in construction type, the additional costs are around legal fees and the cost to condominiumize and, as I said, insurance and some other choices that we would make. And we just find that the delta is pretty significant when you add it up, especially since we are not talking about a huge number of units here, so we wind up having to spread those costs out over a lower number of units, and so it just means the cost per unit goes up pretty significantly.
So if I have to strike frame construction, but higher end for apartments, but go to a different construction, we're going to go condo, and then the liability thing is just crazy these days. But okay, thank you.
Sure.
I assume, Sarah, that your apartments are going to be market priced.
Yes, that's the goal. That is the goal right now. Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Wendland.
To follow up on that, do you know kind of the pricing ranges, will it be similar to the Windward or similar to the Bayrock, whatever?
Yeah, we're certainly, writing, projecting our pro formas out right now for rents that will start in, roughly 2 years, given, pre-development and construction timelines. But I think the Windward is probably our closest comparable in terms of rents at this point. So I would expect them to look fairly similar.
Thanks.
Councilor Nguyen?
Thank you. So as far as making these apartments, so is it the intent of UDP to maintain ownership of this and management of the apartment complex, or is it to eventually divest and sell off to a different operator?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, Eric, feel free to jump in. But our investment approach, we call ourselves a long-term holder, a long-term investor. So our horizon tends to be 8 to 10 years from the start of project until we divest. And we have funds, as Teresa was describing, and eventually we do need to close those funds. But our funds they don't have a set end period. They don't have a sunset requirement on them. So we tend to take the approach of being a longer term holder. We self-manage. So these projects, the residential apartments will be managed by UDP's own property management company. And we really take the approach of, closely monitoring and maintaining those assets for an eventual sale, but you'll see us in the market for quite some time.
Other questions, Councilor Koha?
Sorry. So when you divest expectedly in say 10 years, is the probability whoever purchased it would be then to turn those over into condos? Isn't that more likely?
That's a good question. I think there's always the possibility. We haven't discussed at a company whether we can take some steps at the front end to make it more likely that a condominium would be possible later on. I think when you were talking about the Windward, I know that they did plan and design and construct one of their buildings there with the intent that it could be eventually sold. And that's a process you go through with the Department of Real Estate and really think about how you're setting up the ownership of the building from the beginning. We haven't just gotten to the point yet where we've discussed whether that's something on the front end that we would be willing to do. I think on the back end, a buyer would have to make their own assessment about whether that was something that they felt was, an opportunity in the market.
But some of your construction decisions in the short run, or as you said, the front end, would include that possibility that when you sell, the new owner would want to do that, right?
Yeah. Did you have something to add, Eric?
I would just say that contemplating, based on the current plans, I don't see that there would be any barrier to someone converting them right now. Based on the plans we have, the floor plans are generous enough that someone might elect to do that. Also, 10 years, you're beyond the liability horizon. So whereas if you're planning to build and sell as condominiums within that 10-year period, you kind of have to overbuild, frankly, to just help protect yourself from those liabilities. But then after that 10-year horizon, typically, you're beyond that liability. The building is proven out, the structure's proven out in terms of someone else coming in and purchasing, and the risk is lower. So it is a possibility. We could probably do things to make sure that it's wouldn't be converted, but that's not contemplated in the current design.
Councilor Wendland?
In the parking analysis, the retail constraints that we have on you creates lots of need for parking. Would it be more cost effective to build if you didn't have to have any retail and you did all housing? would that be advantageous path to take or explore?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know that we would change under the current scheme, I don't know that we would change our parking strategy if we didn't have retail right now. I think what the constraint that we're under is that we're building less parking stalls than we're building on the low end of a zoning range, right? And that's our biggest constraint. If we got rid of all that retail and only did housing, we wouldn't be under the constraint of future retail. I think where our constraint comes in is if we had, a 5,000 square foot restaurant that wanted to take most of that space down there, we would be underbuilt on parking, and we would have to figure out some sort of a parking solution for that retailer, or we would not be able to put them in there. I think in the long term that retail's the right thing to do along B Avenue. Even in a point of the market where retail can be challenging, I think for example, I don't think residential along that street at the ground level is a great solution. Nor is just parking stalls. So I think from what UDP would like to do in terms of a building and an approach to good community design is do retail there. I think what we're faced with is the cost of, kind of balancing out where do we spend our dollars on a project. Is it in building more parking stalls, or is it in, finding other ways to invest in the project? So we've sort of made the decision at this point to, build to sort of the required parking and not have to invest, significantly in more parking. Because we believe, people will still come to the retail, they'll park on the street, they'll figure out other ways to get to the project and to patronize the project, I guess.
Right. No, I'm just trying to figure out cost-effective ways. I mean, we have a lot of empty retail space now. It's not necessarily, maybe in the future, but if we have a housing shortage, and so in Lake Oswego, so I'm just trying to balance whether. And you answered the question that it wouldn't be good to put parking in the space or somehow camouflage it so it doesn't look like parking, or reduce the amount of retail space to add parking, because we also have some parking challenges in that area. But I think you meet the criteria. I'm just looking at long range. There's a lot of demand for housing and less for retail. So. And by the way, I have been in Southeast Portland. I have a daughter that lives there, and a number of her friends and whatever have been living in some of your buildings, and I've helped move people in and out of buildings, and you do a great project. So I have no doubt that you'll do a wonderful project for Lake Oswego. So,
Councilor Mans, you got a question?
Thank you all very much for the excellent presentation. Nice, short, succinct, perfect. Thank you. And thank you, Sid, for shepherding us through this bit by bit. I do have a question on the hotel, and perhaps we've already covered that. I know it's a little premature because we're moving into a different phase, obviously, and the RFP hasn't gone out. Would this be a hotel that you would lease out to a management company, for example, or would they then become an equity partner, or whatever the case may be, or is this TBD, if you will?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the business terms that we're contemplating right now is that UDP will be the developer, and we will provide the equity and the debt financing for the project, and we will partner with an operator who will be under a hotel management agreement with us. We if we wind up partnering, and many of these groups that are operators are also investors or part owners, and would not be opposed to that if we had the right operator come in who wanted to also be an equity investor or owner in this project. But at this point, the plan is that we will be bringing the financing.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Thanks.
Any other questions? Councilor Wynn.
So it sounds like as far as hotel piece, that you will build the hotel piece at the same time you'll build the residential piece. You won't, and that's always been the intent, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I think a lot of it comes down to market. Our intent is to bring these two projects through land use together, and have them both get approved through the redevelopment, through planning and together. We will have them under completely separate ownership, so that way we have two assets that, they're two separate assets, two different uses. Eventually, as we divest of these projects, they will likely have separate owners, right? So we want to have the flexibility to do that. So they will be owned and operated separately. We will take them through the permit process as two separate projects. And then right now the intent and the hope is that we can build them together. There's some benefit to UDP, to working with our contractor to have those sequenced in a very efficient way. It saves us money, which is always good. But at the same time, we do need the flexibility, given that these are two separate projects, two different real estate types, to be able to make adjustments based on the market. And, I think one of the things that, as we've worked through, all of the challenges around being a developer in COVID and the pandemic, is that we need to have maximum, work with the city to have maximum flexibility around how we bring this project to light. We do need to capitalize this project. We need to be able to go out and raise debt and raise equity for it. And, right now, that's an extremely difficult time for us to go out to a bank and get a loan, right? Most lenders are not interested in putting money even into a great project that's got hospitality affiliated to its name. So we're all really hopeful that, this vaccine that we're getting news about is going to take hold, and we're going to be in a position where the debt markets start to see that there's opportunity for future hospitality. But the reality is that we don't know yet. So we want to move these along as quickly as we can, but we also, I think it would be a real shame if we tied these projects together and weren't able to move forward on a residential project that was ready to go because we needed several more months to put the financing together on a hotel project. So that's a position that we've taken. Again, I think that from our perspective, the ideal is to move these along together, but we would really like the flexibility to not have to tie the destiny of one to that of the other.
Further questions? Councilor Lamont.
This might be for Sid or Martha. Are we still looking at fast tracking wherever we can? So as UDP keeps adding meat to the bones and gets more detail, can we fast track some of this stuff without getting off track on the building permit process?
Yes, we are. In fact, we've been working very closely, our planning, building, engineering staff, pretty closely with UDP and their design team to expedite and streamline, so we know what to expect in advance. So that will help that process along.
Yeah, I have one more question before we finish. Sarah, you said that you planned on having an operating agreement in January with whoever you selected. Is that a pretty solid time, or is that just a hope and a wish?
Well, I think it's a good possibility. I think one of the requests that we're going to put forward in our request for information is that the companies provide us with a template management agreement so that we're able to review those as part of our selection process. And that puts us in, a stronger position to be ready to negotiate a management agreement as we get into the details. I think probably the most significant challenge to getting, a management agreement done in a timely manner is just knowing the terms of our business deal, not only with the city, but just sort of with the hotel itself, and feeling confident that we know how we're going to mutually operate that. But I think we have a good chance of doing that, certainly in January, first part of February, having that done.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? All right, Sarah, thank you. Chris, thank you. Teresa, thanks a lot. Or Eric, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you so much for having us this afternoon. Really good to see you all, and have a happy and safe and healthy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you
Powell,
all.
we're going to go into executive session now. So in a minute, so I'd like you to read your
Okay.
warnings before we do that.
You're ready for the announcement, Mayor, then?
Yes.
At this point, the board of the Lake Oswego Redevelopment Agency will meet in executive session under the authority of ORS 192.660 subsection 2E to conduct deliberations with persons designated to negotiate real property transactions, as well as subsection F to consider records exempt by law from public inspection. Representatives of the news media and designated staff will be allowed to attend the executive session. I understand a representative of the news media will be present. Representatives of news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session. No final decision will be made in the executive session, and at the end of that session, the Board of the Redevelopment Agency will return to an open session.
Okay. We're going to leave this meeting, and we'll go to the second Zoom meeting address there. Let's do that. Give yourself a couple of minutes, and we'll start on the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, Mayor, we're ready to go.
Okay, the LORA meeting that we've been involved in is now adjourned. It's time now to start our city council meeting. And do we have any people that want to provide citizen comment?
Yes, Mayor, we do. The first person providing comment this evening is Terry Kramer. She's joining the meeting right now.
Okay.
And Ms. Kramer, you may go ahead and enable your video and your microphone. And you will have 3 minutes to speak. Some of the comment tonight will be in person, such as Ms. Kramer. Some of what we read, everybody does have 3 minutes. And Ms. Kramer, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Terry Kramer, and I'm on the board of Respond to Racism, and thank you for taking comments today. I'm speaking to agenda item 8.3, community policing in Lake Oswego. In June, the council decided that it wants to be involved in a community dialogue around policing in LO, and it gave city staff the direction to undertake a process with 3 components: a community kickoff event, facilitated focus group discussions with the community and the police department, and a report back to the city council on what was learned. Respond to Racism has comments regarding the process and also the statement that's set forth in the council report 8.3 on page 2. First, we appreciate the acknowledgement of systemic racism in policing. Dates back to the slave patrols in the South in 1700. And we hope that the initiative you undertake leads with race, which of course does not exclude assessing other areas in the system. Second, the 3 components are a great start. The component in the statement of a thorough evaluation seems like a much bigger project than having discussions. So a few questions to ponder. How does the city envision conducting the evaluation? Excuse me. Has the city considered doing the focus groups now and letting the incoming 2021 council decide how to best utilize city professionals and engage outside professionals with expertise in policing and race to conduct the thorough evaluation? Thirdly, the statement should explicitly include everyone in Lake Oswego, including visitors, workers, those passing through the city, as well as those who reside here. And lastly, Respond to Racism would like a modification to the last sentence of the statement to make it clear that Lake Oswego wants a police department where a person's race does not play a part in whether there is an interaction with the police. And if there is an interaction, then of course, we want to be sure that race does not play a part in the outcome of the interaction. It's going to be a challenge to get people from marginalized groups to participate in the focus groups. So we'll hope you will be sure that their voices are centered and heard, and that you'll enlist businesses to bring in employees, and to encourage BIPOC employees to participate, the school district to encourage BIPOC students to participate, and community groups like Respond to Racism and the Chinese Council to help recruit focus groups participants. We greatly appreciate the work the city is doing, and we look forward to working with you in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, Mayor, the next speaker or commenter tonight is Pat Ginn. She's requested that her comments be read to the City Council tonight. I'll go ahead and start the timer. As a resident of Lake Oswego, I am submitting my statement to be read at the City Council meeting being held on 11/17/20. I have lived in Lake Oswego for 21 years and worked in Lake Oswego for 15 years. As a woman of color, living and working in the community certainly was fraught with multiple challenges. Hence, it is important to be in conversations and listen to the heart of the BIPOC community if your goal is to make LO a more inclusive place to live and work. I would like to address agenda items 8.1, DEI Task Force data, and 8.3, community policing. 8.1, I appreciate the effort that the city and the task force has put into the completed survey involving focus groups. Having dealt with data when I was employed with Lake Oswego School District, the following information would be pertinent in analyzing the full scope of the survey. 1, did the data include those who live outside of LO as part of the survey? This would be important as they bring the perspective from outside the city. That would include people who pass through, shop, visit a friend, attend an event, students who play on teams, and those who work in the community? 2, is there a breakdown of age, ethnicity, and gender? This information would be helpful in gaining a better analysis of the data to ensure there was an even representation and not skewed toward a particular age, ethnicity, or gender. The comparative data between these groups would also be important in determining the specific barriers. Also, there was too low a number of participants in the youth engagement survey to report conclusive data. Recommendation: the full data will give a better idea of the community's character and quality of life while recognizing the need for greater inclusiveness. If that data was collected, please include that in the report. 8.3, community policing. In June, the council decided it wants to be involved in a community dialogue around policing in LO. Thank you for starting this process for defining community policing in Lake Oswego. My recommendation is as follows. 1, ensure that the BIPOC community is well represented. Ask community groups such as Respond to Racism, LO Chinese Council to recruit focus group participants. 2, as previously noted, include data from those who live outside the LO community to gain their experience and perspective of the city. 3, also previously noted, include data for age, ethnicity, and gender to gain full representation. Finally, the last sentence of the statement by the city says that our vision is to ensure that we have a police department where a person's race does not determine the outcome of their interaction with our officers and where all people feel safe. I recommend that we want a police department where a person's race does not precipitate a negative interaction with the police nor affect the outcome of such an interaction. And that is the end. Your next speaker tonight is Frank Glasnick, and we'll have him join the meeting. And Mr. Glasnick, if you would turn on your microphone and turn on your video if you'd like. And you also have 3 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today concerning this most important and relevant policing issue. I speak to you today as a 22-year resident of Lake Oswego, a former Lake Oswego planning commissioner, and a former city councilor. I am also a retired landscape architect with a master's degree in urban and regional planning. I wholeheartedly support your ambition of simultaneously assessing systematic racism in Lake Oswego policing while recognizing the police work is an important and challenging work. As inspiration, I'd like to offer a quote from Nelson Mandela. It is always seems impossible until it is done. To help you in this endeavor, I have 1 comment and 4 questions. My comment is, your proposed statement says that you will thoroughly evaluate your policing systems, structures, policies, procedures, processes, and practices. Yet, there is no mention of analyzing the various duties of policing, such as school resource officers, drug intervention, suicide prevention, domestic argument resolution, petty drug offenses. Let me see, did I forget anything? Oh yes, crime prevention and investigation. And the percentage of time devoted to each of these different activities, which I suggest needs to be a starting point of any discussion concerning policing in Lake Oswego or any other community for that matter. Now my 4 questions. First, why not wait until to start this procedure until the new mayor and the new councilors are seated? Second, how exactly do you intend to define Lake Oswego community? Will it include visitors to Lake Oswego, business owners that do not live in Lake Oswego, people who shop in Lake Oswego, or only the tax-paying residents of Lake Oswego? Third, who will establish the goals and objectives of this process? And fourth, how will a facilitator and the city ensure that the voices of those who have been subjected the police bias in the past are heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Grosnick. Your next speaker this afternoon is Kimby Toe. And Kimby, when you are able to hear us, if you please go ahead and turn on your microphone, and of course your video is optional. You may begin when you're ready.
Greetings, my name is Kim Vito, and I am the current chair of LO for Love, and I'm speaking for LO for Love tonight. I want to thank the city and the DEI task force for their work concerning community policing and DEI findings. These are important steps in reshaping Lake Oswego to be not only a safer, but a more equitable and welcoming place for all. With respect to the DEI findings, our concerns are threefold. First, were demographics data such as age, race, city residency, city employment, and LOSD student status captured for the focus groups and surveys? It is vitally important that the data captured reflect those reflect the concerns of those most likely to be marginalized, namely the BIPOC community. Second, it is not clear from the report whether data from non-residents, including those who work, learn, or otherwise visit Lake Oswego, was captured. As we all know, this city is not a place that many people can afford to live, and non-residents are an integral part of the character and functioning of Lake Oswego, and their voices should be heard. Third, as the report concedes, we are concerned by the small sample size from which the DEI task force conducted its theme analysis, and understandably so, considering the intervening events of the pandemic and forest fires. If the aforementioned demographics data was not captured, we encourage the DEI task force to consider conducting the focus groups and surveys a second time, this time engaging in more community outreach, including to business owners, the school district, and community organizations such as Respond to Racism, to ensure that a larger sample size of those in the BIPOC community are included. With respect to the city's proposed statement regarding community policing, we offer the following comments. First, we urge the city to recognize why the issue of systemic racism and unconscious bias must be addressed. This issue not only undermines the police department's ability to provide services to all, it endangers the very lives and safety of those in the BIPOC community. Second, we request that the statement include at least some general specificity as to how systems and policies of law enforcement will be evaluated and who will be doing the evaluation. Third, we offer that the city's vision should not be to ensure that we have a police department where a person's race does not determine the outcome of their interaction. It should be to ensure that a person's race also not determine whether there is an interaction, period. Finally, we cannot overstate our appreciation for the important work that the city and the DEI task force has undertaken thus far. Notwithstanding, we strongly recommend that the DEI task force become a permanent committee and that a chief diversity officer be hired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Toe. Mayor and Council, your next speaker this afternoon is Willie Poinsett, and she's joining the meeting. And Ms. Poinsett, if you can turn on your microphone, and of course you're welcome to turn on your video when you're ready.
Okay, thank you.
And you may begin when you're ready.
Again, I'm Willie Poinsett, as most of you know, and I'm a longtime resident, more than 34 years here in Lake Oswego, and president and co-founder of Respond to Racism, which is a grassroots group that began in 2017 after a racist incident caused quite a stir on next door. But since that time, I'm happy to say that Respond to Racism has become a viable entity in this community, and it has been a pleasure to work with residents, elected officials, the chamber, school districts, city departments, and all of the businesses and folks that we've worked with. Through our work and relationships, eyes have been opened, and leaders and residents are learning how to recognize systemic racism and identify tools to dismantle it in all of its forms. I was very happy when the DEI task force was appointed, although I clearly advocated for an advisory board. Now that we've had the experience of good work that came out of the task force, it is now time to take the next step. We cannot solve systemic racism that runs through the threads of our city in a year. And so today, I'm again asking the City Council to make diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority in this city by establishing a DEI advisory board. We live in a beautiful city, but behind that beauty is a lot of systemic racism. The DEI advisory board should be made up of a well-balanced representation of ethnic and culturally diverse community residents. This DEI advisory board must be empowered to look at all segments of the city to assess and make recommendations and/or commendations to the City Council. You as elected officials will get information from this advisory board that will enable you to make the changes so that Lake Oswego could become a model of a welcoming, inclusive suburb for all people who live, work, visit, or pass through here. You, our current and our newly elected officials, are at the controls. I have faith you will walk the talk, showing that you value diversity, equity, and inclusion here in Lake Oswego. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next comments come from Doug Irving, and he's requested that his comments be read to the council tonight. Mayor and council members, with bold leadership, Lake Oswego could be at the forefront of addressing systemic racism, especially in its police force. It could, and given its history, should provide a model of assertive anti-racism for other cities in the metro area and beyond. But the statement you have written in item 8.3 is not the statement of a city taking bold and urgent action. Instead, it cautiously notes that systemic racism needs to be evaluated, not rooted out and eliminated. It aims no higher than identifying how police might better collaborate with people in the community. It proposes a series of community dialogues to get feedback on what people expect, but not what they have experienced. And it provides no specific guidance on how the city will ensure adequate participation and representation in those dialogues, or how it will use the testimony it receives. I realize that this is an opening statement, not the final word, and that the intent is to provide some direction without presupposing all of the answers. But as the staff report says, a well-articulated statement needs to lay out the issues and clearly describe the desired outcomes. If those outcomes go beyond just improved collaboration and better police procedures, if, as I hope, the city really wants to do the hard work and take a stand against systemic racism, then it needs to say so in no uncertain terms. And your next speaker this evening is Sandy LeBold, and she's joining the meeting. Ms. LeBold, when you are able, please unmute, and you've got 3 minutes. You can start when you're ready.
Okay, great. I think I've done this through the wonders of modern technology. Good afternoon. I'm Sandy LeBold. I'm a 27-year resident of Lake Oswego and current member of Lake Oswego Response to Racism. I've served the city in the past on the Citizens Budget Committee and the task forces that were looking at the community center and the Foothills development. Today, I am urging council to broaden the vision and scope for evaluating the LO Police Department that's laid out in agenda item 8.3. The recent well-publicized deaths of George Floyd and other people of color has crystallized the need for a transformative and accountable approach to community policing. This is true even, or perhaps especially, in a predominantly white community such as Lake Oswego. Anti-racism work asks us to consider why we remain a predominantly white community and how our systems and structures support that continued de facto segregation. The stated vision for this policing project is to, quote, ensure that we have a police department where a person's race does not determine the outcome of their interaction with our officers and where all people feel safe. While those are reasonable goals, it doesn't go far enough. I propose that our vision should be more to create a community that is diverse, inclusive, and equitable, and welcomes people from all backgrounds and identities to thrive as residents, workers, students, and visitors to Lake Oswego. Input from focus groups is the first step in refining how LOPD can and must operate in a diverse, inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist way while contributing to the well-being of our community. I urge Council to ensure that the recruitment of focus group participants oversamples marginalized persons from BIPOC and LGBTQ communities and includes people of all genders, ethnicities, and abilities. Focus groups should also oversample white, cisgendered, abled, and other persons who have committed to act as allies to marginalized people. This LOPD evaluation should further a goal of creating a community that works for everyone. The evaluation can and should include accountability to the principles of anti-racism, restorative justice, and nonviolence. Our policing function and budget must be reviewed as part of a larger vision for protecting and developing our community that includes housing, employment, treatment for mental health and addiction, and family health and support. Lastly, I urge Council to select consultants who are experts in anti-racism work and have a background in evaluating police departments using an anti-racism lens to help us do this work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Your next comments tonight are from Kate Miller. My name is Kate Miller, and I have specific comments for your consideration. The city has a commitment and is creating opportunities for inclusion. 1, city contracts are an opportunity to build upon. Capital projects such as the upcoming construction of a recreation facility should be leveraged. The wastewater treatment facility is another example. Wherever there are contracts to be let over than a certain dollar threshold of the project expenditures, there must be a review and integration of these strategic goals. This is because we are a community that supports diversity in small businesses. One important consideration, there must be a mandated required woman and minority participation level for all city contracts beginning July 2021. For example, quote, this must be a required level of 20% to be effective, end quote. It has been proven that aspirational targets are not meaningful in moving the dial. There are qualified minority and women-owned businesses in the great metro area. This will be significant in creating jobs, landscaping, sidewalks, painting, carpentry, construction, cleanup. Design and construction-related trades are all willing to build these types of labor forces. There is capacity. The best resources for this are the Oregon Department of Commerce website. There are resources at Metro that we can use to develop contract language. There's a really important area where we can track our results. Ergo, there will be a before and an after. We can compete in this world without an adverse economic impact. As a first step, establish a schedule of an annual audit and create a transparent process with a list of upcoming projects. Identify those that have not been put out to bid and create a recommendation to integrate these goals into the final project requirements, then create specific steps to implement. Thanks for listening to this testimony. And finally, we have one other commenter tonight also requested that their comments be read, Trina Gluckman. Thanks are due to the City Council and the DEI Task Force for attention to their important work. Give some thought to these definitions of equity. Procedural equity, is inclusive, accessible, authentic engagement and representation in the process to develop or implement programs or policies. Distributional equity, programs and policies that result in a fair distribution of benefits and burdens across all segments of a community. Structural equity, decision-making and accountability with recognition of historical, cultural, and institutional dynamics and structures that have routinely advantaged privileged groups in society and resulted in chronic cumulative disadvantage for subordinated groups. The work of the city on this journey toward equity and justice should be an ongoing, transparent process that influences our decisions and actions, our communications and structures, and our interactions with the community. Our community is not just the people who live here. Consider our community also as the people who work here, who visit here, who volunteer here. Consider our community also the people who play and eat and shop here. Consider our community, our students, and our children and our elderly. Our goal should be for Lake Oswego to be an example for the rest of the country. To uphold the banner of equity is to value, embrace, and foster diversity, and to prioritize those with the highest need. We need a permanent, experienced task force with a dedicated position in city leadership to accomplish this. And that concludes your citizen comment for this evening.
We're going to engage in a couple of study sessions, but first I'd like to announce that we have our mayor-elect, Joe Buck, and our newly elected city councilors, Masen Maboop and Rachel Burdick here watching. Unfortunately, Aaron Rapp could not make it tonight, but he'll be active, I'm sure. So the first item of business is item 8.1, which is a study session on Lake Oswego diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Megan, Ms. Phelan, and Charity Taylor are going to present. Is Charity going to be presenting on this?
Yes, Mr. Mailer. Charity should be joining us shortly, as well as members of our DEI task force.
Okay.
We give them a minute to join. I sure would appreciate it.
Thank you.
And when Charity's ready, she will begin the staff report.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. For those of you who are watching who might not know, my name is Charity Taylor, and I'm a management analyst with the City of Lake Oswego. And I've also had the pleasure of being the staff liaison for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. Here with me today are some DEI Task Force members, along with Facilitator Bill De La Cruz, to present an overview of the outreach process, as well as the DEI Task Force's findings. With that, I'll hand it off to Bill to do some introductions.
And it looks like Bill is just joining us, so we'll give him one more minute to connect. I just got permission to be engaged, so thank you. I'm here.
Oh, yes, Bill, I was just hanging out to you do some introductions of the task force.
Oh, okay, great.
I know you just popped in.
Just like popped in. Hi, everybody. So I'm Bill De La Cruz, and I've had the pleasure of facilitating the DEI task force that the council set up to start to look at some of the barriers that may exist in Lake Oswego. And I first want to start out by saying that this is an amazing group of people. I've worked with a lot of folks over the years who are attempting to do this work, and the conversations that we've had about issues around race and class and gender and who's engaged and how do we reach out, we'll go deeper into, I think they'll have been really critical to the success of what you're seeing today. And they all have their own stories and their own expertise. And I just want to say that this was a great group. And I also want to say what I said a few months ago to the council, to say that you can put together diverse teams to work on behalf and with the city, as evident by this group of people that you're going to hear from tonight. So what I would like to do first is just to let them all go around and just quickly introduce themselves. And then I'm going to share a few more comments to set the context. And then we have a PowerPoint that the task force is going to go through, and then we'll open it up to any of your questions, comments, and thoughts. So I'm just going to call people, and I'm going to start with Dr. Massine, because even though you're a counselor-elect, you're still part of the task force. So let's just quick introductions.
You're going to have to unmute, Sam.
My name is Marcel Mout. It was a real pleasure working with these folks. I think we deserve to be heard. They did a wonderful work, and I was proud to be a member of this and to be still a member of this committee. Thank you.
Neil?
Hello, I'm Anil Shah, and I was very happy to be a member of this group, and I learned a lot from participating in the task force. So thank you again.
Emma?
I'm Emma Burke, and I too enjoyed being a part of this task force and really appreciate the opportunity our community has to move forward with it.
Gary?
Gary, I'm sorry, you're going to have to unmute. There you go.
Had to find the right button. Gary Ravello, echo what everybody said. It's been a great group of people. I think when we signed up for this, it was a 6-month assignment that's turned into a 12-month assignment with all the factors that have kind of gotten in our way. But I think the product that you'll see is quite good. By the way, I've resident of the city for 31 years.
Great. Mandro?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mandro Taylor, and I, as well as everyone else who just spoke here, I mean, we've all sort of enjoyed each other's company, and it's been a great process. It's kind of a steel sharpening steel situation where it's been really good at sort of having these conversations to advance equity in our community, just to better ensure inclusion of all the residents here.
Diane?
Hi, I'm Diane Grover. I've been so happy to be part of this task force. It's such a great group of people, and we are all working very hard to make this DEI task force a success.
Lisa? Oh, can't hear you. Let me jump over the. Oh, there.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, well, my headphones must not work, so my daughter and the dog get to hear this whole meeting. Hi, I'm Lisa Strader. Thanks for inviting us tonight. I 6th or 7th what's already been said about this great group and my appreciation for having been invited to be a part of it. So we're looking forward to sharing with you tonight. Thanks for including us.
Daniel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel McCardle Jaimez. I've lived in Lake Oswego for about 5 years. As you can see, it is an absolute love fest here amongst the task force. What is not being said, though, is that the work was very difficult and it was very hard. And we are all happy and grateful to be at this point in our process to share with you. So I feel like this is the climax, but we're really looking forward to sharing tonight, and thank you for having us.
Great. So I'm going to jump in, and then we'll jump into our PowerPoint after my comments. So I'm going to start by saying this work is very fluid, and there's no roadmap to success for talking about race and disrupting systemic racism. And of the many organizations across this country who are working to do this, we're basically learning as we go. And so the task force has worked really diligently to not only become a team, but also have their own conversations about race and bias and judgments and stereotypes and how they could impact the work that we're doing, how they impact the way that we interpret the information that we're getting, and has worked really hard to remove as much bias as we could from the whole process, knowing that it's impossible to be unbiased. And so really working together for this shared outcome that you're going to see this evening. And the work was always designed to provide a snapshot. And so that it wasn't meant to be conclusive. It was really meant to create a foundation and some markers to say, what is the deeper conversations that we need to have related to any of the themes? And I know that we had a lot of conversations about why didn't we get more participation? And it wasn't for lack of effort. When we first started, Mandrill considered our approach to be a whisper, which is just to kind of have a light touch in our outreach. And when we realized that we didn't get the outcome that we wanted, we turned it into a shout. And what that meant is we did work through Respond to Racism and the business community and the city's website, and we put it up on Nextdoor, and people posted it on their Facebooks and LinkedIn pages. And so there's a conversation even there, even knowing that we had COVID and fires, and about, what is it that drives people to be a part of this type of work. And we looked at all of the pandemic, the fires, all the things that were happening as one reason. And we also talked about, how do you build trust in city work such as this, where for some people in the community, there's a lack of trust, and what role did that play? Even though we told people that their comments are anonymous, what role does that play in people being able to step up and come forward? In a lot of our youth category, we had a lot of parents who came to speak for their teenage children, because they said our children don't feel comfortable in this kind of environment. So it promoted these big conversations that the parents had with their kids before they came on. So even though you'll see there were more adults there, they shared a lot of stories that their children told them, and from probably middle school up through high school. And so the data is not conclusive, and it was never designed to be that. I think somebody said the word journey. And this really is a journey that we're on, and this is a first step. And I want to balance this by saying there's a lot of good things that are happening in Lake Oswego as well. And we don't want to bring this report just to say that these are all the things that we need to fix. There were comments that we talked about, wow, how do we build on that one? How do we make this happen more in other communities? And so there was a pretty balanced conversation. And as Daniel said, it was challenging to not only hear some of these stories, but then to look at how do we create themes. And just so you know, one comment didn't make a theme. So within the themes, there were a number of comments. And some of them are not as specific as some might like. And again, the question is, what are the deeper level conversations that we can have rooted within those themes? And just to finish up by saying the process for this dialogue is not perfect, and it'll challenge us. And I think that we need to give each other a lot of grace, that the divisiveness that we see in our country, we can't continue to replicate that in our community. And this work is really adaptive. And we all have to be willing to adapt and flex, and no one person or group has the answer. And even in our focus groups, there were some participants who did not see a problem and why the city is even having this conversation. And again, that's a point of information that we need to have. It's not to say those people are wrong. It's to say, how do we use this as information to just highlight some of the issues that were brought up? And so the last thing I'll say is we as a task force had a lot of conversation about how we do this work through this lens of being aware of our own judgments, and how shame and blame can play a role in this conversation. And we really wanted to work hard to remove as much of that as we could, knowing that judgment is a part of how we all operate, and really looking at this and not blaming or shaming anybody, but really looking at how do we as a city, as a city council, as a community, really work to achieve our goals of a more inclusive and belonging Lake Oswego. And so we're really excited about the process and the outcomes and our conversation tonight. So we're going to go through and share a PowerPoint. And if possible, if you may get really excited about a question, so if possible, if you could hold all your questions till the end, that would be great. If you just have to ask it, just jump right in. And I don't know who's driving the PowerPoint. So I need to, oh, there it is. Leave it to Charity. Oh, the other thing I want to let you all know is Charity Taylor is a gem in the city. She has been so gracious working with all of us and putting up with our attitudes and our schedules and all of the changes and just really keeping the task force on task. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows what a great person that Charity has been to work with, and we really appreciate her support from the city. It's been invaluable. So thank you, Charity. Okay. So again, these are our task force findings. This is a snapshot of our community. Respondents answered from their own perspective. Recommendations report will be shared in December. And I want to be really intentional to let you all know that we're reading our deck because Lisa, who has a lot of background in ADA, keeps reminding us that we may have people listening who are either visually or hearing impaired. And we just want to make sure that they can not only see but hear what we're talking about on the slides. So I'm not doing death by PowerPoint. I'm actually reading the slides for a purpose. Thank you. So these were the main focus areas when we started: the boards and commission, workforce hiring and retention, and then in June, the council asked us to also look at facilities and programming, community engagement, and youth engagement. And so our task force, we conducted online focus groups, and we conducted surveys, and we gathered data to identify barriers to inclusion. And we'll go through some of those numbers in just a few minutes. And this is our timeline. So our background informational presentation started in February and March, and then COVID hit, and we basically stopped meeting for the next 2 or 3 months. And then we just decided that when we, like everyone else, realized that this was our new normal, reconvened virtually and looked at the expanded scope of work, and then did our outreach between August and October, and then since then have been looking at the data and the themes that we'll be sharing with you this evening. So these were the total number of participants. As you can see, boards and commissions, 14, facilities and programs, 4, human resources, 16, community engagement, 20, and youth, 6. And within the human resources, we did both a public focus group, and I facilitated 4 focus groups internally with city employees. And it was a mix of administrators and department heads and staff within various departments in the city. The online surveys, we had a little better response with those. We had 26 for boards and commissions, 69 for facilities and program, 15 for human resources, 47 for community engagement, and 4 for the youth engagement.
All right,
So over to Mandrill Taylor for the next few slides.
All right, appreciate that, Bill. So as Bill just stated a little bit earlier there, we initially went with this whisper approach, and really the basis behind that was to have more of a targeted approach and outreaching organizations and platforms more likely to be utilized by key demographics with lived experiences of exclusion. And again, more of the purpose of that is to provide a more personable approach to better ensure the psychological safety, to better ensure participation. But we expanded to more of a shout. With the slide here, there's several different breakdowns and just sort of shows what we were attempting to capture. One, the respondents, those who live in Lake Oswego and those who do not live in Lake Oswego. We also inquired about the actual years lived in our community, those who live less than 5 years, those who've lived over 10 years. And on the right there, the question asks, do you feel a sense of DEI in Lake Oswego? I think that may be a bit of a paraphrase. I think we actually just asked diversity, equity, or inclusion in Lake Oswego. And the pie chart as shown there, 25% of people say they always feel that sense here, 15% say often, 20% sometimes, 30% rarely, and then 10% never. And other issues actually came up during our conversations as well. The next slide here is our demographic breakdown, and it really is more of a breakdown of self-reported racial and/or ethnic identity that's there. Those who identified as American Indian or Alaska Native, 1%. Those who identified as Asian, 9%. Those who identified as Black or African American, 5%. Those who identified as Hispanic or Latinx, 3%. Those who declined to answer, 13%. Those who are bi or multiracial, 8%, and those who identified as white being 60%. And again, just to note that this excluded the internal HR. All right, so this next slide, it's a pie chart. It shows a breakdown of self-reported gender identity, 66% being female and 32% being male, and then 2% who identified as non-binary. The pie chart to the right here is a sort of a relationship to Lake Oswego. So those who are residents here, those who identified as being residents here, 85% of the participants. 6% of the participants identified as being a visitor. Another 6%, you see two asterisks there, but that includes, if you look below, those two asterisks indicate those who identified as being a business owner, being a manager, or being an employee. And then that 3% that's there, that is sort of other, and then that was a writing category for those who wanted to identify it as something outside of that, and various write-ins were put in there: prospective employee, student, and a variety of others. And this slide here, another about the demographic breakdown. We also assessed for disability, and 12% of the participants identified as living with disability, and 88% did not. We also assessed for sexual orientation, 96% identifying as heterosexual and 4% identifying as non-heterosexual, as well as preferred language, 98% being English and 2% being other languages, more prominently Spanish, Hindi, and Korean. All right. And I'm going to hand off boards and commissions to, I believe, Dr. Anil Shaw.
Thank you, Andrew. So as far as boards and commissions go, and starting with bias, I'd like to actually make a quick comment first about another opportunity we had during the course of the task force time is we were able to sit in as observers in the interviews for boards and commissions. And I, for example, had an opportunity to sit in on an interview, and I was interested to observe certain bias during that time. And bias is always difficult. It's sometimes hard to recognize, harder to eliminate. And I noticed where one of the interviewees had expressed an unconscious racial bias, which afterwards, during the panel discussion, the interviewers really never commented on. So again, I think a learning process there. But moving to the survey results. So on the theme of bias, there were multiple references made to presumptions of discrimination serving as a barrier to participation in the boards and commissions. Also, reports of feeling excluded during meetings by past members, and reports of suspected bias during past interviews. Some of the comments that are included at the bottom, which I will read, are: I have serious doubts that a group of white male privileged interviewers and mayor would select me as a woman for a position on the board. Another participant said, we had a very active, very talented young woman step down because she felt she wasn't being heard. And finally, look for competent people. Diversity doesn't matter. Moving on to my second slide with the theme of increasing engagement. These were some of the suggestions made. One was to increase intentional outreach to community members, seeking members of communities who might feel marginalized or who are less likely to participate. It was noted that lack of childcare can be a limitation, and also that some engagement practices limit interaction with public officials. Looking for more of a fraternal ability to interact with public officials, probably more difficult during our current COVID times, but looking forward to the future. And then no clear expectation of time commitment and necessary qualifications. Our participants expressed meeting times as barriers to engagement. So these were some of the barriers that were identified. I will read one comment that was made, which is at the bottom. I was going to apply for a board, but quit because I got imposter syndrome. I had so many questions. What were the qualifications that I would be judged on? Thank you. That concludes boards and commissions, and I will now pass this on to Daniel McCardle-James for community engagement.
Thanks, Neil. It's tough following the two doctors, but I'll do my best. Hello, council-elects, and those watching from home. Thank you for allowing me to share the findings of community engagement. And for those who offered comment tonight, we hear you, we thank you, we appreciate you. I've had the pleasure of at least facilitating at least one of these community engagement focus groups, and I personally really enjoyed the experience. In my focus group, I specifically recall one of our participants saying, quote, "It's great to know the city of Lake Oswego is doing this, as it demonstrates to me that they are taking this seriously," end quote. And by the way, that individual didn't live in the city of Lake Oswego. I want to underscore that this feedback should not be received negatively. Instead, I want you to see this as opportunities and areas for enhancement. As we look at the first slide here, the first thing we discovered is that there are challenges in the way that the city initiates community engagement in two different ways. The first way is that community members want to engage and they want to participate, but they do not know where to or how to engage within the community. And this is part of Mandrell's earlier slide where he had offered two different kinds of themes in our demographics. We have those that are relatively new to Lake Oswego, and this is where that particular response and theme sort of applies to, whereas those that have lived here for 10 plus years have a different experience because they know how to engage and where to find that engagement. And the other theme is, and when the city does ask for feedback, some commenters report that the feedback isn't welcomed or wanted, and that the city is perhaps just going through the formal motions of just asking for feedback. And so here are some direct quotes that sort of support these findings. And again, it's not just this one, there are multiple ways, and we just took out some specific ones. And for those that are following along at home, I've participated in the summer events in the parks, but have not participated in city meetings. I've not had the time and unsure what areas to participate in. While I'm grateful for the chance to speak and at times have felt heard, I generally have not felt my testimony has been welcomed. So these are common comments, if you will, where people participate in the farmer's market or they participate in other city related events, but they don't know how to engage and offer feedback and want to, but just don't know how to. Next slide, please. On this slide, one of the other themes is related to accountability and the format of meetings. Similar to the boards and commissions themes that Anil had presented, one of the common themes here is that the community desires ways and formats in which meetings are less transactional and that they're more relational in nature. And so here are the two observations that sort of capture that. The city does a great job in soliciting feedback, but could do a better job in reporting the results and the next steps back to the community. And we'll share some ways in which we believe the city can enhance this effort in our findings, or excuse me, in our recommendations next time. The other theme is if and when the city holds town halls or public meetings, the city could be less transactional, again, more relational. So overall, the observations we heard here is that the community is looking for feedback loops and opportunities to engage with you as city leaders and employees and get to know you on a more human level, as less of a transactional level. And here are a couple of quotes offered that sort of support these themes. It is very open and available. For example, anyone can submit comments at any city meetings. This is a comment that was offered from someone that has lived in Lake Oswego for a long time. So we are finding that people find that the community engagement process works great for them. Whereas with others, city staff and elected officials could foster trusting relationships by meeting people where they congregate instead of assuming everyone is comfortable applying for a board or even attending a city council meeting. So again, two very different schools of thoughts and experiences here when thinking about community engagement. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so this slide theme captures challenges related to inclusion and the need for systemic change. Many offered observations related to the city to integrate language, visual and audio disability access into their outreach practices. In addition, another interesting theme that came up, especially in the community engagement surveys and focus groups, is that many want the opportunity to discuss, plan, and participate in opportunities to showcase, learn, or even talk about DEI-related opportunities. It feels like the community is very thirsty and hungry for the opportunities to participate in this. And we want to note that the library was mentioned on several occasions directly, in which people applauded their programming efforts. And so it seemed to be that was the only sort of department that was continuously referenced in our surveying and focus group process. So I think that's an important thing to note. If I may read some of the comments, the last few years I participated in the LO Libraries Diversity and Inclusion Book Group. That was just one specific thing, but there were many other examples. One commenter had reported that broad advertising with all the details given to everyone using language that is welcoming and inclusive, asking for participation, making the event space accessible for all, and making any necessary accommodations easy to ask for and to get. This is just one of many different kinds of examples and or observations that were provided to us. Mandrel had shared earlier that 12% of our respondents had identified as having a disability or access-related issue. And I will pass it over to Emma on youth engagement.
Thank you. We found, even though it was a small sample size, we heard consistent messaging. Some groups, youth were involved with diverse and inclusive toward people of color, and others were not. Also, it was mentioned that not many opportunities for those who were in middle school. And I would add, as a parent to elementary kids, even younger. And then a quote we have here is, on the city level, there aren't many opportunities for those younger than high school. There are opportunities for middle school students in sports, at churches, but not really offered by the city. Middle school is when students have the time to engage with leadership opportunities. And the next slide says varying degrees of people's understanding of racial issues. We found that depending on people's lived experience, they might have a different understanding of what it means for people of color in our community. And we also saw in the second bullet point, we need to continue to build relationships in the community. Another quote here is, we've had many opportunities to teach people. Unfortunately, I feel there's a disproportionate burden on people of color to educate people versus white people taking it upon ourselves. I'd like to see more community-led discussions. And I will pass it to Gary with Human Resources.
Probably not too surprising that an HR module landed with me. In full disclosure, I'm the HR director for the city of Milwaukee. So I will say up front, hopefully I don't say anything that causes Megan too much heartburn. And Megan, if I do, we can always chat about that. First theme is internal culture. I would kind of echo some comments you've heard, even with the community comments today, that it is a small sample size. And when you're assessing an organization's culture, my preference would be to hear from at least 70%, and ideally even more of the employees. There are ways to collect that kind of information, and I think you'll see that come back when we talk about recommendations in December. The other comment I'll make is culture is always evolving. It should always be tied to a consistent set of values. But as Bill said, this is a snapshot in time, and culture is always a moving target. And if we're looking to change the direction or the type of culture that we're seeing in the organization, it's always important to determine what is the as-is state versus your desired state, find the gaps, and then make plans to change the direction of that culture. With that being said, one of the things we heard in the things was that the culture is internally inclusive, but a very white population. I'm hoping that doesn't come as a huge surprise in terms of a theme that we heard. I think the question that we need to ask is how inclusive is inclusive if everybody looks and thinks like you? When you start moving down the diversity path, it will create a lot of hard conversations. The next bullet is culture varies department to department based on leadership. And I will say, I don't think I've ever been in an organization, small, large, private, or public, where you don't see micro culture. So again, not too surprising. It's just a matter of what kind of variance do you have between the departmental culture versus the organizational culture. Next one is, it's a nice culture if you go along to get along. Again, kind of to reiterate the point, if it's a nice culture, how hard is it going to be to have those difficult conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion? Comments that we received: one, there's no visible representation of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color anywhere in Lake Oswego that I've seen. I've never seen or heard of a non-white cultural event until Black Lives Matters, but that is citizen-led. Other comment: we are definitely in that there is a conflict, but we are just going to move on, kind of brush it under the rug and move on. Again, not the kind of comment you want to hear if you're approaching a lot of hard conversations around DEI. The next theme is around consistency around internal practices. First theme was hiring is decentralized with some oversight by HR, and I'll say that's pretty much how it works. You have hiring managers, and they need to make hiring decisions. So I wouldn't take this comment as any indication that you want to move to centralized hiring. But you're always looking for the best applicant, and just so people listening know, when you're making those decisions around best applicant, that has to be a colorblind decision, not something based ethnicity or race. Just cannot be a factor in the hiring process. That comment was no DEI hiring or retention strategy, and I guess my comment would be welcome to the club. I don't think a lot of organizations, at least a lot of local cities, have gotten to that point where they have a really clear articulated DEI hire or retention strategy, but I think it's time to get going with it. Everyone's struggling with it, but I think it's great that Lake Oswego is starting on that path to get that type of strategy in place. Comment we received on more of the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion side of things. I think we haven't made it a priority, and that is very evident across the board at all levels, from communication to the website all the way to hiring. I know the city has made it DEI a goal, so I think we need to think about how that's getting communicated into the organization so that in fact it does become a priority. Next is employee engagement. The first comment shouldn't be too surprising. Cost of housing and limited transportation choices is a barrier to hiring. Especially when you consider that, Megan, I hope this is fairly correct. I would think that most of your hires are outside the city and are not going to be city residents, which means they really are going to look at things like transportation and housing. In fact, you may even hire out of state as well as outside the city. Next comment was employee onboarding needs to be an employee engagement touch point. I think that's a great comment. Employee engagement starts the day the employee is hired, and it probably should never stop. And employee onboarding, from my perspective, tends to be at least a 6 to 12 month process to make sure somebody is onboarded appropriately into the organization. One of the comments, there's a lot of pushback whenever there are talks of trying to expand TriMet routes within the city, and the city itself is not a place that most people can afford to live in, myself included. With that, I will pass it over to Lisa Strader for facilities and programming.
Thanks so much, Gary. Good evening. For facilities and programming, I was able to participate and even facilitate some of these sessions, and I think it was Daniel who also mentioned, or maybe Anil, that they both facilitated and participated in sessions. So that gave a broader perspective of how consistent the messages were across all of these areas, even though they were also area specific. So our first theme for facilities and programming was access and safety. Mostly people were satisfied with the facilities. In fact, people were mostly very complimentary of the facilities that the city of Lake Oswego has. But following that were numerous comments about how those spaces, as beautiful as they are, do not feel welcoming to the BIPOC community. So, and just to be really clear, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So an example that I remember is a mom who was complimenting parks, but this woman was white and she has a child who is BIPOC, and that child was harassed in the parks. So, and I think, again, I think that from participating in more than one of these areas, that kind of a comment was really common. We heard from several families who are multiracial and with parents that are white or present white, and children who are of color, that they could be in the same space and get completely different treatment. So moving on to the third bullet here, participants said that materials and languages other than English are a sign of inclusion. So I professionally live in a world of accessibility, and at least for the city of Portland, language accessibility is a very big part of that. And we don't wait until somebody requests something in another language. We provide other language documents in other languages. And it kind of begs that question, chicken or the egg, you know, well, we don't provide it because it hasn't been requested. Well, but people aren't necessarily even going to be here to request it if they don't know that it will be provided. So some quotes around this theme is that visual representation of diverse groups, actual people working at the event from diverse cultures, and culturally focused events honoring diversity is something that somebody saw was really important. And I guess another story following that is that we heard from people of color who said that they go outside of our community, even though they live here, to get their culturally specific events because they aren't offered in the city where they live. Another comment was for me now it's accessibility. So again, from the world I live in, making sure that what we have is accessible to everyone is really important. It's a federal requirement of the ADA. It's also just a really welcoming feeling when people don't have to ask for something to make them feel included and feel part of the group. And as Bill noted for you earlier, at the beginning of this, we're reading our slides so that somebody who is blind or low vision has a better opportunity to have the same experience in this presentation tonight as I do for someone who's sighted. And the final quote on my slide here is, when I see event listings, I automatically look to see if interpreting services are offered if needed. So just pointing to another city, events like this for the city of Portland always have at least closed captioning. In that way, you will have something that a screen reader can read to somebody. You're describing the slides for somebody who's blind, and you're having words on the screen for somebody who's deaf. and you cover a lot of people who would otherwise be excluded by taking those two actions automatically in events. You can move forward. Thanks, Charity. So the second slide that I have on facilities and programming identifies our theme of socioeconomic and family diversity. So I think earlier somebody mentioned this as well, maybe Emma, but programming focuses on certain ages, incomes, and two-parent households. There's a pretty consistent representation from people who offered a comment that there's a kind of an assumption that most people, or just about everybody we program for, has a certain kind of household in Lake Oswego, and that's not the case. We actually heard from a lot of households that don't have two parents and aren't of what a lot of people think of as an income level that the city of Lake Oswego is typically known for. And there were a lot of, there were comments about programming for those younger ages as well. And then this is a little bit of a repeat from the slide before, but really important with DEI work is that our programming lacks cultural diversity. There just isn't programming that people see themselves in the city, and they go elsewhere for that. So two quotes that we have related to this theme is, there are great programs available. I feel that sometimes they are not accessible to working families. And the second quote here is, communicating it in a way where more people can know what is going on. One post was celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, but how? Are there events? Are we doing things to embrace other cultures? We say we are celebrating, but how? And I think with that, I'm turning it back over to Daniel. Thank you.
Thanks. And so this is the closing slide here. And for all of the surveys and focus groups, the questions that the final question that we'd asked was, what additional steps should the city take to community engagement, to facilities and programs, et cetera? And so this is what that pie chart captures. And what we learned is that there are additional steps that the city can take. And everyone had offered many ideas as it relates to that. So you'll see that actually 67% of our respondents contributed really interesting, creative ideas to address all of these focus areas. Whereas 18% of the respondents said, everything works great for me. And then you'll see here that there's a neutral response. And what that means is that people either left it blank or they offered no feedback because they themselves didn't feel like they could offer any sort of helpful guidance or specific advice to the city about what additional steps the city could take. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Bill to close us out formally.
Yeah, I'll just say that concludes our presentation, Mayor Studebaker and Council, and we'd be open to your questions, comments, and thoughts.
Well, Bill, first of all, let me thank you and the presenters, Mandel, Emmett, Gary, Daniel, Charity, thank you as well, and Diane, thank you, and Lisa. Thanks for your input. Thanks for the work you've done. We'll look forward to your recommendations next council meeting. Councilor Mann, did you want to say something?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. I echo exactly what you say. This has been an amazing amount of work from volunteers, and I cannot tell you from the bottom of my heart how much this means for our city. It's quite extraordinary in my rather limited understanding of this field. While you were speaking, I did have a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. And I think that you may have touched on this, and I just would like to say it, that this is the beginning of a journey. It's the beginning of a process. This is not meant to solve problems or create a city pure of anti-racism overnight. And I appreciate how much you spoke around that subject. I think it's vitally important for our citizens and myself to understand that. we've spoken much about COVID and the fires. I think we have an opportunity in this. I cannot believe I'm saying we have an opportunity in COVID and fires, but having had this pause and this elongated way of going about this project could certainly provide a deeper, richer understanding of what we're doing. Thirdly, and I will put this out there, and I don't know how my colleagues feel, and I might be jumping the gun a little bit, so to speak, but they may be used to this by now. I'm wondering about waiting until next year in order to move forward on some of the initiatives that we're working on, such as the statement, such as other pieces of this work when we have a new council in place. And I mean, no disrespect whatsoever for our current council. I just know that this work will be ongoing and would love to involve our new council. So once again, that was less of a question than a statement. Thank you all for your indulgence. Thank you, Mayor, for your indulgence. And with that, I'll cede the floor.
Councilor Wendland?
Well, I'd like to thank the group. We kept hearing what an outstanding group you were, and I think you are way over what they told us. So, I mean, you guys, thanks for the presentation. I know that you're all engaged in this this work. You're passionate about it. I know that for one, I don't know. I think we will be continuing this work into the next year for sure. And I think there's lots of reason to have a DEI standing committee, because just the subject matters that you brought up, there's enough work to be done for a lifetime. So I do think there's a couple things that I agree with Councilor Manns. I think there's some initial initiative here and momentum that we need to keep rolling with, and that we have the new council totally engaged in it. And I don't know how we go about that, but I'm looking forward to the recommendations you have. And from my perspective, there's a lot of the things that you've told or that were a reflection of our community. There's some things that we can work on as a city, and some things that we can accomplish as a city, and some things that I know that we need to do as a society. And I'm not sure that we're able to do that as a council, but I did see some things on which I would love your recommendations on what we can do. We are in charge of almost 380, almost 400 employees in the city. And that's our first point where I think that we can work very hard on to figure out onboarding, figuring out policies that we may need to look at, figuring out to give Megan and Martha the support that they need to help make our employees successful. And I really liked a lot of the work. I also saw a lot of common ground with our youth and the adults. And I'm trying to figure out whether you could give a recommendation where we could somehow work with the school district and their efforts so that we're not duplicating things. I would love to see some sort of a recommendation from you on how we can bring our community together, both young and old, and work together as a total community instead of sort of one silo over here at Cityland and one silo over here at the school district, because I know that they're working on it. And I'd love to see some of the combination of our efforts. And then the third thing, and probably most important thing, is give us recommendations kind of in order of where you really think that we should work first and hardest, because I think I look at, we could have city council meetings 7 days a week, and I don't even know if we would get through half the list in a year. So if you could prioritize where you really see our huge opportunities that we could work on first, and then kind of move through some of them so that we can get. I would love to have some accomplishments for 2021 to really get some momentum going. And we can't solve everything in a short amount of time, but for you to help prioritize from your perspective, because you're really in it. And I know some people have been frustrated as individual citizens in Lake Oswego. And obviously we want to help them, but you have listened to the aggregate input, and it would be really helpful for me as a counselor to know where I need to really get into the major opportunities that we have, and then then together we can maybe figure out how to move forward on it. But that would be helpful to me, and thank you so much for all your work. And someday maybe all of us can get together, because I think a lot of this work has to be done in 3-dimension, and I think 2-dimension is harder. It would be wonderful to build better relationships with you in person. So I'm looking forward to that time. Not sure when it will be, but I'm looking forward to that time. So that's it for me.
Teresa, Councilor Kohlhoff.
So again, I've had the pleasure of being with everybody, and as Daniel said, it turned into a love fest, and I'm proud of that. I would like to see the recommendation come out as has already been planned, and then make determinations about what was implemented at the next regime, next administration. That would be fine with me, but I would suggest that they've been at this for a long time and they didn't sign up for it to spill over. I think that it's pretty obvious to the vast majority of us that some kind of advisory committee will need to be invented and repurposed, take the task force and turn it into an advisory committee. So I would suggest hearing the recommendations, and then actions upon it can start taking place in 2021.
Councilor Mott.
Well, I would like to also thank you, and I commend you. I think you've already come up with a recommendation. What you did tonight was a model for other boards. We rarely get a chance to even hear from the chair, let alone each and every member. It was well orchestrated, well done. We got the facts and figures without a lot of long-term discussion on the front end. So I think that's something we should look at for when key recommendations come out of our advisory boards, is to orchestrate it like you did, because everybody was involved and engaged, and it was great to hear from all of you. As a planner thinking comprehensive and long range, I think you hit that. And also, there's also a delicate balance of qualitative and quantitative information. We got to be careful because it is a small sample size. But I think I'm kind of going where Councilor Kohlhoff is some practical, pragmatic recommendations for us to put a bow on and then send to the next council. And then things we really can accomplish, as Councilor Wendland said, short-term and long range. We don't have the time tonight, but like to hear more from Megan Phelan. We talked about this when we were briefed last week, about what we're doing already to recruit and hire, and then how we could adjust that. I just want to make sure people on the outside don't think that we're not doing things, that we're sitting there and we're just letting things happen. So I think a presentation from our HR folks would be key, and then adding to that, here's some things we can do. So practical, pragmatic, short-term, long range, and I think we could put a wrap on this for December and then start doing the work in 2021. Thank you.
Councilor Mans. I can't hear you. You're muted.
I know.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm muted now. I just wanted to make a follow-up statement that I do not in any way, shape, or form expect of this task force to continue on through 2021. That wasn't my intention at all. So please don't take it that way. I was simply wanting to allow for our new incoming board to have a say in the final product. So thank you again. And your work will be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Phelan, Charity, you got your marching orders as far as you're concerned? Are you clear on that?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I think Mr. De La Cruz would like to say something.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to comment on Councilor Wendland's perspective on this and say that you're right. There are things specific to the city and there are issues specific to society. And I've been working with a lot of leaders across the country. And some of the conversations we have are, how can you support the messaging, the conversation that we need to have as a community, and help us to break down some of the divisiveness that we've seen in this conversation across the country. So as leaders, I think you still can play a pretty large role in both messaging and also modeling to us as a community, either the challenge of the conversation, the richness of it, the ability to put something like in place and move it forward. So I would say you can play a role in both. And I wouldn't say that either one is less important, because to accomplish what we need as a city, we're going to have to come together as communities to really have the dialogue and move the work forward. And Councilor Lamont, I think you're on the same track that we are in terms of looking at what are some quick wins that we can do, because there are some really good best practices that are already happening in the city that we're not really sharing with each other. So that's another piece, just as you recognized, even in the format of this presentation, we did it very intentionally to be inclusive of all the task force members. And so we talk about those things like, rather than just have one person, how do we model inclusion, which you picked up on, and have everyone play a role? And so that was also intentional. So I think there are a lot of small ways that you can have an impact in the community that you might not even be aware of now. And I think that's the beauty of looking at this as that long range work, because organizational change theory says it takes 3 to 5 years to shift the culture of an organization. So we all have to commit to the marathon approach versus these quick hits that don't really impact the systemic structure, which is really what we're looking for.
Well, we'll look forward to getting your recommendations in a couple of weeks.
Okay, we'll have the work cut out for us.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, the next, thank you very much, folks. The next study session is Mr. Cross going to lead us or inform us on the master fees and charges. Hello, Mr. Cross.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors. I'm Shawn Cross, the Finance Director. That time of year again, where we get to do the master fees and charges update. I'm glad to say that this is another anticlimactic change in master fees and charges, not like 8-9 years ago when we were doing the lowest project and the water project at the same time, where we had the 25% rate increases for both the utilities. So that said, I will try to be brief because I know you have a lot more meeting left to go, and I will share my screen. If you have any kind of questions during this, just pipe in because I can't see everyone. If not, I think I can get through this in about 5 or 6 minutes. So
good. That's admirable.
Let's see if we can do this. Really, to start off, I'll mostly do the utilities like I usually do, but like building, you've approved those rates last month in October. Planning fees were at the CPI at 0.8, so 0.8% this year, so it's pretty low. And so really on that, I'm just gonna go right into the utilities. We'll start with the stormwater fund. As you can kind of see, we're projecting that fund balance will be here about $1 million at the end of this fiscal year, so the end of next fiscal year. So we've had 2 large projects. We had D Avenue and we had Wembley. That has kind of depleted the fund. So we're in the process of adding back to the fund balance to do a future projects. There was about 14 million in unfunded in the CIP. So when we update when engineering, the city engineer updates the CIP, the 6-year CIP for this year, we will be, I'm sure, utilizing this fund balance in the out years when we're projecting the projects that we can do. The next fund is the street fund. We've been using lots of the bonded money that we sold last year, which was about sorry, I just got an email from Anne-Marie. I'm trying to figure out what it's saying. So for the street fund, what was I going to say? Oh, so the fund balance is projected at the end of this year. So this is really, in the last 2 years, we've been using the bonded money that we just sold with the extra state shared revenues. So that $700,000 a year debt service. And so what this is showing is still using about $8-9 million worth of capital over the next few years. We're going to be using up a lot of the street maintenance fee and the other state shared revenues, which we haven't been using for the last couple of years, up through about 22, 23, which will bring the fund balance down to about $2 million. And then we'll start building it back up with an average about $5 to $6 million worth of capital outlay in the out years. Next is the sewer fund. So what this is really, what we're doing with this one is, you really saw from Mr. Hooper and FCS, so Sergey gave you a presentation back in July that really was with the updated information from BES on how much to update the Tryon wastewater plant would be. Previously, we were using data that we had from 2014, which called for 3% rate increases. What this is, with the update that we got back in July, says for the next 15 years, we need a 3.9% rate increase. So that's all been incorporated. So you can kind of see here, again, the fund balance is going to go down, but it's mostly going down because of the interceptor sewer that's in the CIP. That's about $10-11 million in the Foothills to get the sewage into the new plant. Let's see, and the last one is water. And so what this one incorporates is the is the water master plan projects. And again, we had FCS update our model after the LO Tiger project was done, and we knew kind of what our expenditures, our debt service and everything, and our capital coming in. And again, this one is expected to have about a 2% rate increase for now for, like, say, the next 5-10 years. Even though you can kind of see with the increase of adding all of the capital that needs to be done with the wastewater plan, it brings the fund balance below $2 million. We're looking at probably needing to do a smaller $15 to $20 million bond issue at that point to do this capital, but it's expected that within our models, that 2% rate increase that we're looking at will be able to make that additional debt service payment with that increase. This one I always bring up. So this is the data for about the last 13 years on what the water consumption is. And what I really want to point out here is it's pretty hard for us to sometimes know exactly how much rain we're going to get over the summer, because that's really the variable here over the last 8 years is how much it rains over the summer is how much, how little water we sell or how much water we sell. So when we're doing our budgets, we really try to project for about 300,000. So about 1.2 million units of water sold for residential. For us, that's an average year what we budget for. And you can kind of see that we're kind of up and down. Well, last summer, so not 3 months ago, but say 15 months ago, when summer, that's for this fiscal year 1920, this is about 1.55 million units of water. That's the least water we've actually sold, you can kind of see, in the last 13 years. This big drop here is just when we went from the tiered rate to, from the non-tiered rate to the tiered rate. You kind of see that we did have substantial amount of water savings there. But it's just so you can kind of see that this is the water, and this is kind of sometimes why sometimes we're $400,000 above budget. And like last year, we were about $400,000 under our budget for revenues for water sales. This is the increases that we're asking you to look at. This is what it comes to the bill. Even with a 3.9% increase in sewer, which is over half of the bill, the total bill increase is about 3.5%. So it's, like I said, not super climatic, but it's not like it was, like I said, 8-9 years ago when this was more like 25%. So, and then in the out years, we're looking at water at 2%, sewer at 3.9%, storm at 7%, just because it's such an anemic fund, and trying to keep up with those projects like D Avenue and Wembley. Every time we do a street project, there seems to be like a $2.5 million stormwater project that ends up ensuing because, in addition to it. So trying to get it some money to actually be able to keep up on the projects. And then street is the one that's actually tied to the 20 cities construction cost index, and it can be anywhere between 2 and 4%. So we just always assume in the out years 3%. So with that, any questions?
I don't see anybody have any question. Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Perfect.
Okay. Next item is
Then I will be back on December 1st since there was no changes to this, it'll look just like you saw it before for our public hearing and the adoption of the master fees and charges.
all right. Thank you. Next item is 8.3, community policing in Lake Oswego. Ms. Phelan, are you going to lead us on that?
Yes, Mayor. We'll just wait one more minute to make sure all of our folks can join us.
Welcome, Chief.
Well, good evening, Mayor, City Council. My name is Megan Phelan, Assistant City Manager, and I am here to talk with you about community policing in Lake Oswego. And more specifically, we're looking for your feedback and direction on a proposed statement and process to engage in a community conversation about policing in Lake Oswego. I'd like to first introduce our team of facilitators. This team includes Bill De La Cruz, who you just heard from as our DI Task Force facilitator.
You guys are never going to get rid of me.
And also want to introduce Lillian Say. Lillian's also part of the facilitator team. And unfortunately, Juanita Range is unable to join us this evening, but she makes up the third person as part of that team that we are working with. You may recall each of the counselors met with one of the facilitators to ensure that the goals and scope of this project are clear. And we do intend to do that again as we head into the next year with the new counselors and a new mayor. Based on that feedback and in conclusion and consultation with the city manager and the police chief, we developed a statement that we hope identifies the issues that could be addressed as part of this project. And it is important that we define the statement and are very clear about what we intend as part of this process, both not only what we hope to achieve, but perhaps also be really clear about what it does not include. Because I think we have to be, in order to be really successful and to meet the expectations of our community, those items need to be really crystal clear about what we're doing this work for. I do appreciate the feedback that we heard this evening during the public testimony. I took good notes and was definitely listening as part of that, and do appreciate people taking the time out of their day to provide that feedback to us. I was not intending to read the entire statement aloud to you all. It was in the packet, but I did want to touch on a few points. The first sentence is the City of Lake Oswego is committed to providing high quality services to every person in our community. And later on, we do also say that we are undertaking these community dialogues to identify ways to strengthen how our police department collaborates with all of the people in our community to provide public safety. And I think what we did hear from some testimony was we want to make sure that all also means people that work in our community, that have businesses in our community, that travel through our community. And the answer is yes to that. To steal from the school district, all means all in this case. And it's important to us that we do include as many people that we consider part of our community as part of this process. So I want to mention that. We will thoroughly evaluate our systems, structures, policies, procedures, processes, and practices with the goal of building public trust and relationships. I wanted to clarify that we did intend that to be all inclusive and including, I think we heard some testimony about would it include job descriptions and jobs or duties that police officers perform throughout their daily activities. And that would wrap up under processes, practices, procedures, because certainly the police department makes those distinctions about how they're going to respond to certain calls, whether they're going to be SROs in the schools. And so that was intended to be an all-inclusive list. So I wanted to clarify that as well. I think it's important that we also mentioned that we is a group of facilitators that we've hired to engage in this work. It includes staff, and it certainly includes the city council. What we heard when we were with you in July was that the council wants to get roll their sleeves up and get in the middle of this work, as opposed to, as you recall, with the DI task force, you're really relying on them to come back with their findings, which they did earlier, as well as their recommendations. But what we heard in July was that the city council actually is the ones that will have an interest in rolling up their sleeves and diving into what we hear back from the focus groups and being part of that recommendation process. So if that's direction is different or has changed, that would be good feedback for us to hear this evening. I finally want to just mention that the other comment was a confirmation, I think, that this work leads with race. And I believe that opening statement there where we talk about how systemic racism needs to be evaluated in law enforcement. And given the fact that we are part of that system, I think that does signify that we are leading with race as we approach this work. So I wanted to clarify that as well. Finally, there was some comments about the very last statement or sentence rather in the last paragraph. Our vision is to ensure that we have a police department where a person's race does not determine the outcome of their interaction with our officers and where all people feel safe. I realize there is some concerns about how it's worded. We did not intend that the person's race will mean we will have any interactions with them. And so I think we could either eliminate the phrase the outcome of or move it to after interaction. So I don't want folks who are potentially viewing this or the council to think that was what we intended. I think what we were trying to say there is a person's race should not determine whether or not they have an outcome or the interaction of the outcome with the police department. I'm going to pause there and see if City Manager Bennett or Chief Jorgensen would like to add anything, and then would love to hear from the council.
So can I ask one question first?
Absolutely.
Chief, are you comfortable with the statement that's been developed?
Absolutely. And I think Megan has succinctly kind of put in all the notes that I was also jotting down as we were listening to those. So
thank you. Go ahead, Megan.
I want to see if Martha had anything to add.
No, you did a great job of making sure that we reflected back the comments. I think we've also been really trying to cautiously avoid long lists in here. So I guess I would only say in response to public comment, it is our intention to think about visitors, to engage with visitors, to engage with employees, business owners, and folks who pass through as well. But we didn't really want to list and then miss somebody. So that's when we said all people, we really meant all people. And we'll work on a way to fix that last sentence because I agree that we didn't intend for that to be how people would read it.
Questions, comments? Councilor Nguyen.
Thank you, Megan, for presenting that to us. I just wanted to kind of circle back to our time in July, and at the time I had made a point that I felt that as council we need to be able to provide enough room, enough space for those that would be come up with recommendations to come up with recommendations independent of our involvement at the early stages. And I think that for me, I think as time has progressed, I still feel that that's how we should approach this, much in the same way that we've approached receiving recommendations from the DI task force. I think we, as counselors, I'll speak for myself, I haven't been stopped by the police that often. I don't have brush ups with law enforcement that much. And I think for me to try to understand and try to come up with recommendations with regards to community policing at this stage is premature. And so I would propose that maybe we look at the direction we gave to staff before and possibly reconsider maybe certainly coming forward with the new council coming aboard. I would propose that we allow a group, whatever that group is, whatever that focus group is, to be able to come up with recommendations and to be able to kind of talk about this without having, quote unquote, our thumbs on as counselors on this, because it's much more difficult when the counselors and people in leadership are in the same room and trying to talk about these structures of authority. So my feeling is that we should revisit that and consider kind of being able to provide, at least in the early stages, this the space to be able to have citizens and people to come forward and talk freely about their experiences with law enforcement.
Thank you, Councilor Wynn.
Councilor Mans. Unmute, please.
Trying to be so good about that. Excuse me, I have a question for Ms. Say, if I might. In her work with police departments, many years of work with police departments, do you feel that this statement is general enough that it would allow for what Councilor Wynn is saying, for example, that a new council could work around this? I'm not quite sure how to phrase this. To use this rather as a constitution, if you will, or a preliminary statement that would give people enough leverage or leeway to expound or expand on it?
Well, I think that, well, I believe that the more general you are, the better you are. But at the same time, the more general you are, it won't satisfy, for example, BIPOC's expectations. And so it really depends on the city. And Lake Oswego is very different from Portland, is very different from Hillsborough, is very different from Beaverton. And I have knowledge of Beaverton and Hillsborough. And so I have friends who are police officers. I've done extensive conversations with police officers, sworn police officers, and also police chiefs and former police chiefs. And so I don't like to have a sweeping statement that covers everybody and says, well, this statement is going to work for everyone. So I think what Councilor Wynn's idea is a good one, is that we vet different people so that we cover all our bases. So the more data we have, the more able we are to serve the citizens' needs or the public or the community's needs. I don't know if that directly answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much for your expertise and time.
You're welcome.
Councilor Lamont.
I have two questions. One would be following up the discussion about reaching out and focus groups, and that would be, I would hope that our police officers would be part of the interview process. I know our chief and captain are heavily involved as our executives, but that we would actually reach out to our officers to find out what they learned from before they got here about other communities, what they learned at the academy, what they feel from the community, what they feel with DEI initiatives. I think it'd be great to hear from them as well. And then the second question is for the chief. Where are we with the school resource officers? I understand the school district is exploring that, but is this policing review having anything to do with their own SRO officers? And one quick addition, I've had a couple neighbors already ask me about it, that there was a meeting the other night, and what's the mechanics of that review for the SROs?
So I can't speak to the ins and outs of how the school district is doing their review of it. I know generally because we were involved in our portion of that. So I'll speak to how our statement kind of encompasses our approach to it. And when we talk about procedures and processes and all those things, that would include the school resource officer in our discussion. So how we kind of worked it out with the school district is the school district is doing their process because they're a different entity. They get to have their say with their schools. And so they're running a parallel process, so to speak, as we are running our process. And at some point, we'll marry those two processes. And I know we have a great relationship with the school district, and we've been in conversation with them, both Captain Simon, myself, a couple of our administrative officers, and our two school resource officers had interviews with their facilitators. And now we're waiting for them to finish up their process, which I think will be sometime in the middle of December.
And Councilor Mott, if we could go back to the first question you had, I think that might be a good segue to turn it over to Bill and Lillian to talk a little bit about the process. And certainly we can come back to any other comments any other councilors have about the statement after that.
Councilor Kohlhoff had a question first. Can we do that first?
Just very quickly, it's really important to me to see that you're handling this independently than the DEI, because once you throw in the issue of the police, I think you scramble it. And so what, to some degree, had an integration as we started talking about DEI that we just were talking about versus this issue with the police and leading with race. That, for example, something as simple as gender might very well have big DEI implications, and many white heterosexual women never had any problems with police. But if she's a lesbian and she's white, then maybe yes. So I am glad that we have made that determination. You know, obviously down the road it can all be changed, but it does appear very wise that we separated out the two.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Bailey.
Bill, would you like to take it over and talk a little bit about the process that you and Lillian and Juanita have?
And
Thank you.
I'll address Councilor Lamont's. We do have a plan to. I've been working with Chief Jorgensen about how to structure the interviews with the department, not just the police, but he wants the 911 operators and everyone who's associated with the department, because it's more than just what we see in policing. And I think Chief Jorgensen is aware of that, and so that's one of the structures. So initially, what we had proposed was a kind of a kickoff community meeting, just to give counselors the opportunity to share their perspective, to talk about why this work is important, and then do a engagement process with members of the community. I think the most important piece is to really think about, from your lens, how do you want to, and who is the community that you will be inviting into these conversations. And I believe that it'll be a larger group of interest than maybe what we saw in the DEI task force work. And so that's one piece that is important for you all to talk about, in terms of who are the folks, how do we recruit them, and how do you make sure that it's a diverse group? And if we're leading with race, how do we make sure that BIPOC community is a priority in terms of making sure that their voices are part of the conversation? And then that initial kind of community kickoff is really designed for the community to see the commitment of the city council and the city to say what the value of the work is, how you each are going to approach this, and so forth. So just really giving you a chance to kind of kick off the meeting. And then we have community focus groups set up throughout a period of time after that, where those will be absent city councilors, and it'll just be facilitators and the community groups just really talking about the questions. And that's another piece that is important for you all to think about, because what our team is doing is facilitating questions that you believe are important. And so what's the process that you want to use to create the 4 to 6 questions that will be part of this focus group process? Because I know I'll let Lillian share some of her ideas in a minute, because she's been doing that, and I have ideas. But I think what we really want to make sure that we're doing is gathering the information that is important for you, so that we can really move the dial in this work. So that's a piece that also needs to be fleshed out. And so then, as the focus groups go through, we had planned for kind of a mid time frame check-in again, to bring city councilors back in to say, you know, here's where we are, here's some of the things that we've heard, just to kind of keep you up to speed as to where we are, and then finish the focus group process, and then go through a process of gathering the data, putting it together, and crafting recommendations. And so one of the things about the questions is this would be a great opportunity to also engage the community, because to ask them what's important as well in terms of making sure that what we focus on is really going to be impactful for you as a lens as leaders in having to implement, and then for the community, for them to feel like the process was beneficial and transparent, and that their voices really did matter in the conversation. And I'm going to ask Lillian to chime in a little bit with some of the, maybe a question or two that other departments have asked.
Okay, so I have a whole list of them, but I'm going to
No, you
pick
do.
maybe a couple. So these questions are specifically for police departments, and it is, of course, not cast in stone. But one of the things that I like to ask is, what do you believe, to a police officer, is the most important thing for the community to understand about the police department? And also, what's important for the community to understand or know about you as a human being and not just a police officer? So the reason why I ask these questions is because many people forget that police officers are humans, and they're real people. They're real flesh and blood people behind the uniform. So one of the things that I like to say, that I like to get at, is what's inside the uniform. Who's the person behind that uniform? Because they are stereotyped enough, and actually overly so, and many times it's very negative. So, and then another question could be, what stereotypes about police do you struggle with the most? You know, so there are all kinds of other questions I will ask, like having them describe their experiences growing up, having them describe their experiences with different cultures, for example, in the city of Lake Oswego. And I'm sure there are a lot of stories. We've already heard a lot of stories from Chief Jorgensen about actually a lot of good work that the police officers are doing, the police force is doing in Lake Oswego. So, you know, these are just things I throw out. Some of these questions I've vetted with other police officers in different cities. However, that may not apply to Lake Oswego. So, you know, everything that we do, that our team does, is working in very close collaboration with the stakeholders, meaning Chief Jorgensen, with the city manager, with the mayor, with the city council, the mayor if desired, and city council members. Because without that close collaboration, we're going to be just operating in a vacuum. It doesn't work. And of course, working with the community. Does that answer the question, Bill?
Yep.
Any questions, anybody? Councilor Wendland.
So the next steps then are, we will have a chance to kind of talk about this at the kickoff meeting, but from the standpoint, I did like on the DEI process when you did the surveys and whatever, where council was not included, so people can come forward and have have a free opportunity, a free forum to express themselves. I think that's super important, and I think that should be included in your process. Correct? I mean, that's attention. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think this is great. I like the statement. I think you could wordsmith it probably a little bit more with different inputs from people, but I think in general that it says what we're doing. I think overall, I would hope that we try to tell our community that I mean, at the end of this process, I'm really hoping that we are striving to have the very best community policing model for other cities to follow. And I think that's the why that we're doing this. And we need to look at it with a very wide open lens on the subject of race and how we deal with that. And I'm looking forward to this process. I think it's set up correctly. I think your statement is very comprehensive. And I think the bigger picture is at the end of it will be a better community, and that's what I'm hoping to have. So I'm looking forward to the work. So
anybody else have? Yes, Councilor Lott.
Well, I'm looking forward to the questions too. I think Lillian and I had a long conversation when we did the interview. And my thing is, I think we're all there, is not to demonize our police. They're very hardworking, and that we look at them as human beings trying to do the job to protect us every day. And then what can we do to do better? And I would even like to see us drill down a little bit on things we already were doing, like You and Blue and Coffee with a Cop. And the chief brought in that program from Portland about bringing the young Black teens in to get to know the police and take ride-alongs and have lunch with them. Are they working? Are they not? Do people know that they're out there? Right before COVID hit, we were doing Coffee with a Cop. I heard good comments about that. And I've said, and I think Councilor Wetland just said it, I mean, we are more advanced, I think, than most suburban departments I've worked with. And we could be a model for 21st century policing if we keep this calm and respectful and learning from everybody how we can do better. But we're doing good now, so let's just make sure we're probing the right way. And we go from there. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councilor Nguyen.
Mr. De La Cruz and Ms. I, did you have, I was looking at the packet, did you have a timeline? I know that you're talking about these different events that kick off in the focus groups. Do you have just a rough timeline of when the first event would be and when we can expect to see this happen?
We haven't determined that yet. We actually were hoping to do this, and then it was actually our recommendation to pause this until the new city council and the possibility of a new mayor was coming on board. So we wanted to pause it and actually start the work in January to make sure there's continuity.
You certainly don't want us old guys in there.
That's not what I said. You said it.
I didn't hear that.
I think the other challenge too is anytime you run a community process over a relatively busy time in people's lives, like the holidays is a big challenge. As you heard earlier, participation in the DI task force focus groups was a challenge for us, and I really want to overcome that and not pick a time of year where people are otherwise busy with other obligations.
Any other questions? Yes, Bill, go ahead.
I just want to remind us all that, like, we're building this process as we go, and we're going to make missteps, and that we have to really show each other from the community side, from the city side, a lot of grace in this process, because people always say, well, who's doing it really well? Who's doing it really well? And there aren't really models out there. And so there's going to be conflict. That's a part of it. And we are comfortable with conflict, Lillian and I, and Juanita. We know how to use conflict as a tool to support the conversation. And just be patient. We understand the urgency, and yet if we push too fast to get something done, then we're going to miss a step and we're going to have to go backwards. And it's very hard to digress back when we've gone too fast. So that's where, Councilor Nguyen, it's important for us, as Lillian said, to work with you to say, what's a good schedule, time frame? How do we do this in a way that doesn't disrupt people, and we know that we'll have the most opportunity to get people engaged. And so a lot of these things, like Lillian and I and Juanita, we have a process, and then those logistical pieces is what we'll work closely with you and the city manager's office to say, what's the timeline, what are people's calendars, and then kind of build the process from that point. Because even all of the interviews that we did with all of you, we're going to want to do with the new group coming in of councilors and mayor to give them an opportunity to get their feedback as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Bill, Lillian, thank you for being here.
Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye. Have a nice evening. Thanks.
All right, let's go on to the council business. The first is approval of additional consulting services in the public-private partnership.
Can I make a motion? Oh.
Yeah, I was going to do the same thing, but Anthony, can you make this reasonably quick?
I can.
Good, do it.
Okay. Thank you all for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. This is the 6th time that I've seen you on the wastewater treatment plant project. And so basically what I'm here asking you to do is to approve an additional $335,000 to continue working on this project to get us through to about mid-April. And once again, this project is to figure out whether it is in the city's interest to move forward with a brand new state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant that is aesthetically pleasing, that has environmental benefits, that is much smaller footprint, and also has just a much more efficient life cycle cost than to invest in an old 1965 plant that is down in Foothills that is owned by the city of Portland. So that's what we're trying to figure out. And the kind of the rules of whether or not we move forward is that it has to be the same rate impact that it would be going with the existing plant, and it would also need to meet all of our other needs with looking at viability technically and all those other things. So with all that said, back in January, you all gave me $450,000 in order to get me to the RP release date. We released it on October 16th, and we've expended that money. So the reason that we only asked for enough money to get us to that point was that I think it's kind of a check-in, kind of accountability for the council, so that it kind of causes me to come back and ask you for a little bit more to keep going and make sure that I'm going the right track, and also to once again kind of take it in bite-sized pieces. So that's why I'm here again today, is to take the next bite-sized piece to get me to the preliminary services agreement, which is in mid-April, which right now all these three teams are working really hard to come up with proposals for us, and they're going to submit them in either January or maybe we might give them a little bit more time, so it might end up being February. We haven't decided that yet, but we're working very collaboratively with them, and it's a lot of give and take. They're asking a lot of really great questions, but it's causing us to really think things through. And we've done a lot of work up front to really create the parameters for this, including, we had a 90-page document we did for the RFP, and also another 105-page, basically preliminary services agreement and term sheets, and all these things that they're going to have to review and bid on and compete on. And it really, because it kind of tells the parameters and kind of where we want them to go in the future.
Okay.
So,
Councilor Wendell, do you have a motion to make?
Well, Anthony, you're on track, I think, and it's not unexpected to see this number and have you come back, and we appreciate it. So I move to authorize staff to spend an additional $335,000 in consulting services to continue to explore the feasibility of the public-private partnership project to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain a really nice new water treatment plant.
Second. Who seconds?
Okay, any discussion? Questions of Mr. Hooper?
With great appreciation, Anthony, too.
You call it?
Sure. Mayor Studebaker,
Yes.
Councilor Wynn,
Yes.
Lamont,
Yes.
Wendland,
Yes.
Mans,
Yes.
Koha,
Yes.
and O'Neill.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Anthony, good work.
Good
You've
work.
done a great job. That's why you get such enthusiastic reactions. So keep it up.
with sincere gratitude. Thank you.
Now, the next item is resolution for solid waste with Republic, but we're told this item will be delayed until the next meeting. And I guess, Ms. Bennett, you have an explanation to give us for that.
So we learned something, Adam. I think you may all know that Metro is contemplating rate increases because with COVID, they've had a significant decrease in volume, and to maintain their system, they need to raise rates to offset the volume. In a meeting that was held on that rate increase, we learned something about some of the fees that are in our current rates that causes us to need to take a look at the proposed rate adjustment. Some of those fees should be incorporated into our rates and treated in a different way. And we just didn't have time to get the rate schedule redone once we got this information yesterday afternoon.
Okay, so we'll delay that until next meeting.
Yes.
All right, next item is an annexation ordinance for 0.28 acres at 5950 Southwest Harrington Avenue.
As the mayor says on the agenda, that too is being continued to the December 1st meeting.
Right. So we're going to discontinue. We're going to continue that. So that brings us to the consent agenda.
Move to accept the consent agenda.
I'd like one thing though, Madam Recorder, on the minutes for item 7.3. wait a minute. Excuse me, the meeting minutes, just a minor thing. On page 11, item 7.3 on line 2, it talked about rivers, doing, the rivers would be something. It should be the drivers.
Should be, that's,
So that's so minor, I don't think it should have anything to do with it.
Right,
So-
we can make that administrative change.
Okay. Now, we've had a motion made and seconded, is that correct?
Yes, Counselor Wendland and Counselor Mann seconded. Are you ready?
Any
to have-
discussion at all, anybody? All right, call the roll, please.
Sure. Mayor Studebaker
Yes.
and Counselor Wynn,
Yes.
Lamont,
Yes.
Wendland,
Yes.
Mans,
Yes.
Koha,
Yes.
and O'Neill.
Okay, at this late hour, is there anybody that needs to provide information for council? Or from council? Anything anybody just has to say? All right.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks. Reports of
Can we say
officers,
that?
reports? Any reports, Martha?
I would only just let you know that I think I wrote this in the email to you, but we're going to continue our current practice around the new COVID restrictions. And our current practice is educate first, warn second, and cite only as a matter of last resort. So I know that there was some media traffic around more aggressive enforcement on people who might be having parties in their homes. And I just want you to know our approach is not going to change. And we have not had to issue any citations since the beginning of all this fun stuff.
Right. Okay, that's it. We're going to light the Christmas tree tomorrow. So that'll be online. That'll be something that's done online.
Tomorrow?
We'll be there. to
No,
do it.
not tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yes,
No,
it
not
is.
tomorrow.
Yes,
Oh, we.
yes, yes, it is.
Oh, you're tomorrow or here?
It's tomorrow at Safeway. We'll be lighting the tree tomorrow.
Oh,
Who? You?
Who knew?
I think many of us suspected it would be the day after Thanksgiving. So, but that's many of us are ready for 2020 to be over. So let's get it on. Let's
And many
go.
of you would be wrong, but that's nothing new. Okay, thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Great.
Peace out. Good night.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Kat.
So.